there is a path that winds through the mountains of the Himalayas, where prayer flags carry ancient mantras to the heavens, and where seekers have climbed for centuries in search of peace. Tonight, we follow one such seeker, a young monk named Tenzin, whose journey from restlessness to recognition mirrors the journey we all must take from seeking to finding, from confusion to clarity. Welcome to Buddhist Insights Journey, where we explore the timeless wisdom of the Buddha through stories that calm the mind and nourish the spirit. I'm honored you've chosen to spend this time here, in this space of rest and reflection. Tonight's journey unfolds over 5 hours, weaving together the profound teachings of the Dharma with the intimate struggles of a human heart seeking its way home. These are not just stories, they are teachings that have brought peace to countless hearts across centuries. Before we begin Tenzin's journey, I invite you to join our global Sangha. In the comments below, share where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's beautiful to see how this ancient wisdom connects us across all boundaries. Now, settle into your comfort. Let your body find its rest. If you drift into sleep, that is perfect. Let us begin. The first light of dawn touched the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, painting them in shades of rose gold and amber. A young monk named Tenzin climbed the final stone steps toward Tashi Gompa, a monastery perched high in the mountains of Tibet. Prayer flags stretched across the path, their faded colors, blue, white, red, green, and yellow, fluttering in the thin mountain air, carrying mantras to the heavens. Tenzin's maroon robes were dusty and worn from 5 days of travel. His legs ached from the altitude, but his mind was far more restless than his body. Questions tumbled through his thoughts like stones down a mountainside. Questions about suffering, about enlightenment, about the very meaning of existence itself. He had spent 8 years studying in the monasteries of the lowlands. He had memorized countless sutras debated with learned scholars, practiced meditation until his legs went numb. Yet peace eluded him. The more he learned, the more questions arose. The more he practiced, the more frustrated he became with his lack of progress. Other monks spoke of profound experiences of visions and realizations. But for Tenzin, practice felt like pushing a boulder uphill, exhausting and endless. He had heard stories of Lama Dorje, the old teacher who lived in this remote mountain Gompa. They said the Lama had achieved perfect peace, that his very presence could calm a troubled mind, that he had spent 20 years in solitary retreat in a cave above the monastery. Tenzin hoped he needed this teacher to finally give him the answers he sought. Surely someone so enlightened could explain what Tenzin was doing wrong, could show him the secret he was missing. The monastery gate stood open, its wooden frame carved with protective deities and auspicious symbols. Tenzin paused at the threshold, suddenly nervous. This was the moment he had traveled so far to reach. He stepped through, his feet crunching on the gravel path. The courtyard was simple, a few ancient juniper trees, a stone path worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, a small fountain with a prayer wheel beside it. And there in the center stood an old monk sweeping fallen juniper needles. His movements were slow and deliberate, each sweep of the broom mindful and complete. His face was weathered like ancient wood, deeply lined from years of sun and wind, but peaceful, deeply peaceful. His maroon robes were faded and patched, speaking of decades of wear. Lama Dorje, Tenzin called out, bowing deeply, his palms pressed together at his heart. The old Lama continued sweeping. He did not look up, did not acknowledge the greeting. Tenzin waited, uncertain. Perhaps the Lama hadn't heard him. The wind at this altitude could carry sounds away. He cleared his throat and spoke louder. Venerable Lama, I am Tenzin from Ganden Monastery in the valley. I have travelled from the lowlands to study with you. I have spent 8 years in practice. I have studied the Lamrim, memorized the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra, and won debates at the monastic assembly. I seek your guidance on the path to enlightenment. Still, Lama Dorje swept. The soft whisper of the broom against stone was the only sound, accompanied by the distant tinkling of bells from the prayer wheels and the flutter of prayer flags in the wind. Tenzin felt his face grow warm. Had he offended the Lama somehow? Was this a test? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the old Lama stopped. He leaned on his broom and looked at Tenzin for the first time. His eyes were clear and kind, but also penetrating, as if they could see straight through to Tenzin's heart, past all the layers of learning and ambition to the frightened seeking soul beneath. You have climbed far to arrive here. Lama Dorje said, his voice soft but clear with the slight rasp of age. But tell me, young monk, have you truly arrived? Tenzin blinked, confused. I don't understand, Lama. I am here. I have arrived at your Gompa. The Lama shook his head gently, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your body is here, yes, but where is your mind? Where is your heart? Tenzin opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. Where was his mind? Even now, standing before the teacher he had sought for so long, his thoughts were racing ahead, wondering what the Lama would teach him, planning what questions to ask, worrying about making a good impression, hoping this would finally be the place where he found what he was looking for. His mind was everywhere, except here, in this moment, in this courtyard, with this old man and his broom. Lama Dorje set down his broom carefully, as if it were a sacred object. He gestured to the courtyard around them with a sweeping motion of his weathered hand. Listen, he said simply. Tenzin listened. At first, he heard nothing but silence, the vast, profound silence of the high mountains. Then gradually sounds emerged, the soft call of a raven circling overhead, the gentle trickle of water from the fountain, the whisper of wind through the prayer flags, the distant ring of a temple bell, the rhythmic creak of the prayer wheel as it turned in the breeze. Feel, the Lama said. Tenzin felt the cool, thin mountain air on his skin, the rough stone beneath his feet, the weight of his travel bag on his shoulder, the rise and fall of his own breath, the beating of his heart adjusting to the altitude. This moment, Lama Dorje said, his voice carrying the weight of profound truth, is your first teaching. Tenzin stood very still. Something was shifting inside him, though he couldn't name what it was. For 8 years, he had been chasing enlightenment, like a man chasing the horizon, always ahead, always out of reach, always just beyond the next mountain pass. He had been so focused on becoming enlightened that he had forgotten to simply be. Come, the Lama said, picking up his broom. I will show you where you will stay. Tenzin followed the old monk through the courtyard, past the main temple, with its golden roof glinting in the morning sun, past the kitchen, where smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of roasting barley, to a small building at the edge of the compound. Lama Dorje opened a wooden door. its surface carved with the 8 auspicious symbols and gestured inside. The room was tiny, perhaps 8 feet square. A meditation cushion sat in one corner beside a low table. A sleeping mat was rolled against the wall. A small altar held a butter lamp, a bowl of water offerings, and a small bronze Buddha statue. A single window faced east toward the rising sun and the distant peaks of the Himalayas. "This is where your journey begins," Lama Dorje said, his voice gentle but firm. "Not tomorrow after you have settled in. Not next week after you have learned the monastery schedule. Not someday in the future after you have practiced enough. Now. This moment. This breath." The Lama turned to leave, then paused at the door. His silhouette was backlit by the morning sun, making him appear almost translucent, like a figure in a Thangka painting. The Buddha taught his disciples, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." You have spent 8 years preparing for the journey, Tenzin. Perhaps it is time to actually begin. With that, he was gone, leaving Tenzin alone in the small room, with only the sound of wind and the distant chanting of monks beginning their morning prayers. Tenzin set down his bag and stood in the center of the space. It was so simple, so plain. No books, no decorations, nothing to study or analyze except the bare essentials for practice. Just this room, this moment, this breath. He felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Was this all after traveling so far, after building up such expectations? Just a small room and an instruction to be present. He walked to the window and looked out. The sun had fully risen now, flooding the valley below with golden light. The mountains stood silent and eternal, their peaks touching the infinite blue sky. A yak grazed on a distant hillside. Prayer flags snapped in the wind, sending their blessings across the landscape. Somewhere that bell rang again, soft and clear, calling the monks to practice. Tenzin sat down on the meditation cushion. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not found in the future or lost in the past. It exists only in the present moment. How many times had Tenzin read those words? How many times had he recited them, analyzed them, debated their meaning with other scholars? But he had never actually done what they said. He had been treating the present moment as a stepping stone to some future achievement, not as the destination itself. He had been so busy trying to become enlightened that he had missed the only place where enlightenment could actually be found right here, right now. Tenzin took a breath. Not a special meditation breath, not a breath technique he had learned from the texts, just a simple, ordinary breath. Air flowing in, air flowing out. He felt his chest rise and fall. He heard the sound of his own breathing. He was aware of sitting, of being alive, of existing in this particular moment in time, in this particular place, in space, for the first time in 8 years perhaps. For the first time in his entire life, Tenzin was fully present. Not thinking about the past, not planning the future, not trying to be anywhere other than exactly where he was. And in that simple presence, something extraordinary happened. Nothing happened. There was no flash of light, no profound insight, no dramatic transformation, no vision of deities or pure lands. There was just this, a young monk sitting in a small room, breathing aware present. And somehow, in the ordinariness of it, there was a peace he had never known. Not the peace of achievement or success, but the peace of simply being without needing to be anything more. The mountain breeze carried the scent of juniper through the open window. The bell rang softly in the distance. Prayer flags fluttered their mantras, riding the wind. Tenzin sat on his cushion, and for the first time in years, he was not trying to get somewhere else. He had arrived. Not at the monastery that was just geography. He had arrived at the only place that mattered, the present moment. And in that arrival, his journey truly began. Outside, Lama Dorje smiled to himself as he returned to his sweeping. Another seeker had arrived at the gate. Another student was taking the first step on the pathless path. The old Lama had seen it countless times, the restless arrival, the confusion, the gradual awakening to what had always been here. It never grew old, this miracle of remembering. Each time it was fresh, new, as if happening for the first time. He swept the courtyard, clean the broom, moving in rhythm with his breath. Each stroke a meditation, each moment complete in itself. This was the teaching he would offer Tenzin, not through words, but through example, that enlightenment is not somewhere else, not some other time. It is here, in the simple act of sweeping. Here, in the breath. Here, in the eternal now. The sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stones of Tashigompa. A new student had arrived. The teachings would unfold, as they always did, in their own time, in their own way. And Lama Dorje would be there, sweeping, waiting, present, a living reminder that the path is not about going somewhere, but about being fully where you are. Tenzin woke to the deep, resonant sound of the monastery's great horn, the Dungchen, calling the monks to morning practice. Its long, mournful note echoed across the mountains, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. He had slept deeply in his small room, more peacefully than he had in months, wrapped in thick wool blankets against the mountain cold. He rose, splashed his face with icy water from the bucket by the door, and made his way to the main temple. The sky was still dark, scattered with stars that seemed close enough to touch at this altitude. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Lama Dorje was already in the temple, sitting perfectly still before the altar, with its rows of butter lamps flickering like earthbound stars. The scent of juniper incense filled the space. Tenzin took his place on a cushion and closed his eyes, settling into the familiar rhythm of meditation, expecting to sit until sunrise, as he had done for years in the lowland monasteries. But after only a few minutes, the Lama rose. "Come, Tenzin," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have something to show you." They walked through the awakening monastery, past the sleeping quarters, where other monks were just beginning to stir, past the kitchen, where the cook was lighting the fire for the morning tea. Lama Dorje led him to a gate at the back of the compound that Tenzin hadn't noticed the day before. The old Lama pushed it open with a creak of ancient hinges, and they stepped into what should have been a garden. Tenzin stopped and stared. The space was large, perhaps 60 paces across, but it was completely overgrown. Wild grasses and weeds tangled around what might once have been vegetable beds. Thistles grew waist-high in some places, their roots thick and stubborn. A few struggling plants poked through here and there, turnips choked by vines, herbs, lost in a sea of unwanted growth. It looked like no one had tended this garden in months, maybe years. The wooden fence was broken in places, and the stone borders of the beds had crumbled. Lama Dorje handed Tenzin a small hoe, its wooden handle smooth from decades of use, the metal blade worn but still sharp. "This is your practice," he said, simply, his tone matter of fact. Tenzin took the tool, confusion washing over him like cold water. Lama, I came here to study the Dharma, to deepen my meditation practice. I thought you would teach me about the nature of mind, about emptiness, about... I am teaching you. The Lama interrupted gently, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. This garden is your classroom. These weeds are your teachers. He gestured to the overgrown beds with a sweep of his hand. Begin here. Work until the noon meal. Then we will talk. With that, Lama Dorje turned and walked back toward the monastery, his maroon robes disappearing through the gate, leaving Tenzin alone with the hoe and the impossible task before him. Tenzin stood there for a long moment, his mind churning with disappointment and resentment. He had traveled 5 days to get here, climbing through mountain passes, sleeping in caves, eating sampa and dried yak meat. He had left behind his comfortable monastery, his fellow students, his books and studies. For this, to be a gardener, he was a scholar, a serious practitioner who had studied with respected teachers. This was servant's work, not the path to enlightenment. But the Lama had given him an instruction, and he was a monk. He was trained to follow his teacher's guidance even when he didn't understand it, even when it seemed beneath him. So Tenzin knelt in the dirt, the cold earth seeping through his robes, and began to pull weeds. The morning sun climbed higher, and with it came some warmth, though the mountain air remained cool. Tenzin worked steadily, yanking out handfuls of grass and thistles, tossing them into a pile. But for every handful he removed, more seemed to appear. The roots ran deep, tangling around each other, clinging to the rocky soil with stubborn determination. Some broke off when he pulled them, leaving the root still buried, ready to grow back stronger. His back began to ache from bending, his hands soft from years of holding prayer beads and turning pages of texts started to blister. And with the physical discomfort came a rising tide of mental anguish. His mind filled with complaints and judgments, a constant stream of resistance. This is pointless, he thought, yanking at a particularly stubborn weed, its roots refusing to release their grip on the earth. I should be meditating, studying sutras, receiving profound teachings about the nature of reality, not doing manual labor like a novice who just arrived at the monastery. He attacked the weeds with increasing frustration, pulling them roughly, throwing them aside with force. The Lama is testing me, he decided, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. He wants to see if I'm serious, if I'm humble enough, if I can accept menial tasks without complaint. Fine. I'll show him. I'll clear this entire garden by noon. But the harder he worked, the more the garden seemed to resist him. His aggressive pulling disturbed the soil, uprooting the good plants along with the weeds. His hasty movements scattered seeds that would only create more problems later. A thistle tore his hand, drawing blood. He cursed under his breath, then felt guilty for cursing, then angry at himself for feeling guilty. The spiral of judgment and self-criticism tightened. By mid-morning, his hands were bleeding in several places. His robes were soaked with sweat, despite the mountain chill, and the garden looked barely different than when he'd started. Perhaps even worse, with disturbed earth and scattered vegetation everywhere. Tenzin sat back on his heels, close to tears. He looked at his bleeding palms, at the scattered weeds, at the disturbed earth, at the mess he had made. He had failed. He couldn't even do this simple task properly. What made him think he could achieve enlightenment? What made him think he was worthy of studying with a great Lama? He was useless, incompetent, a failure. "You are fighting a war," came a voice behind him. Tenzin turned to find Lama Dorje standing at the garden gate, holding 2 wooden bowls of butter tea steam rising from them in the cool air. The old Lama approached and handed one to Tenzin, then knelt beside him in the dirt with surprising grace despite his age. "Drink," the Lama said. "Rest a moment." Tenzin drank gratefully the salty, rich tea, soothing his parched throat and warming his body from within. Lama Dorje set down his own bowl and reached for a weed growing near the edge of a vegetable bed. But instead of yanking it out as Tenzin had been doing, he did something different. He loosened the soil around it first, gently working his fingers into the earth, feeling for the roots. Then slowly and carefully, he pulled the weed roots, and all intact, and placed it in a basket with the same care one might use to handle a sacred object. The Buddha taught that our minds are like gardens. The Lama said, his voice soft and unhurried, each word deliberate. Greed, anger, and ignorance. What we call the 3 poisons are weeds that grow naturally. They are part of the human condition seeds that were planted long ago by our karma, by our conditioning, by our habit patterns formed over countless lifetimes. He reached for another weed again, loosening the soil, first removing it with care and respect. When we discover these weeds in ourselves, our anger, our craving, our confusion, we often react with violence. We attack them, we hate them, we try to rip them out by force, thinking that if we just try hard enough, if we're just disciplined enough, we can make ourselves perfect, pure, free of all defilements. Tenzin looked at his bleeding hands at the weeds he had scattered everywhere in his haste and frustration. He understood what the Lama was showing him. He saw his own violence reflected in the disturbed garden. But this approach, Lama Dorje continued picking up Tenzin's hoe and demonstrating with gentle movements, only creates more suffering. When we tear at our own minds with judgment and force, we damage the garden itself. We disturb the soil where wholesome qualities are trying to grow. Compassion, wisdom, patience. We exhaust ourselves with the violence of our own self-improvement. We become our own worst enemy. The old Lama loosened the earth around a large thistle, working patiently, then removed it completely root and all, holding it up to show Tenzin the intact root system. Right effort is different. It is patient. It is gentle. It acknowledges that these weeds are natural, that they will grow, that this is not a failure or a flaw in you. The practice is not to achieve a garden with no weeds that is impossible even for the Buddha. The practice is to tend the garden with wisdom and compassion day after day without hatred for the weeds. He placed the thistle in the basket and looked at Tenzin with kind, penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything: the frustration, the self-judgment, the desperate striving, the fear of failure. These weeds will return tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. This is not failure. This is the nature of gardens and minds. Enlightenment is not a state where no unwholesome thoughts arise. It is the patient, compassionate tending of the mind garden moment after moment, without hatred for the weeds or attachment to a perfect result. Tenzin felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening like ice melting in spring sun, like a seed splitting to let new growth emerge. He had been treating his own mind exactly as he had treated this garden, attacking his thoughts with judgment, hating his emotions, trying to force himself into some ideal of perfection, measuring himself against impossible standards. And all that violence had only created more suffering, more self-hatred, more distance from the peace he sought. "Lama," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been so harsh with myself. Every time anger arises, I judge myself as a bad practitioner. Every time desire appears, I think I'm failing on the path. Every time I make a mistake, I tell myself I'm worthless, that I'll never achieve enlightenment. I've been at war with my own mind for 8 years. Lama Dorje nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Yes. And how has that war been going?" Tenzin looked at his bleeding hands and laughed a short, sad laugh that held years of pain. Not well at all. "No." The Lama agreed, his voice gentle. "War never goes well. Violence never brings peace, whether we direct it outward or inward. But there is another way, the Buddha's way, the way of compassion even toward ourselves, especially toward ourselves." He stood slowly, his old knees creaking, and offered his hand to help Tenzin up. "Finish the morning here. But this time work differently. Loosen the soil first. Remove the weeds gently. Water the good plants. And when you notice yourself becoming frustrated or angry, pause. Breathe. Remember, you are not at war. You are tending a garden. You are caring for something precious." Lama Dorje walked back toward the monastery, his figure growing smaller, leaving Tenzin alone once more. But this time, everything was different. The garden looked the same, still overgrown, still full of weeds. But Tenzin saw it with new eyes. It was not his enemy. It was his teacher. Each weed was an opportunity to practice patience, gentleness, compassion. Each moment of frustration was a chance to notice, to pause, to choose a different response. He picked up the hoe, not as a weapon this time, but as a tool. He approached a section of the garden and knelt in the dirt. This time he worked slowly. He loosened the soil around each weed before pulling it, feeling for the roots with his fingers. He removed them gently, carefully placing them in the basket, instead of throwing them aside. When he found a turnip plant struggling beneath a tangle of vines, he freed it with patience, supporting its stem, giving it room to breathe and grow. The work became meditation. Each weed removed was a moment of mindfulness. Each plant tended was an act of compassion for the plant, for the garden, for himself. And when he noticed frustration arising, when a root broke off, when the work seemed endless, when his back ached, he paused. He breathed. He remembered the Lama's words. This is not war. This is practice. This is not failure. This is the path itself. By the time the monastery bell rang for the noon meal, Tenzin had cleared only a small section of the garden, perhaps a tenth of the whole. But that section was truly clear, the soil loose and healthy, the good plants freed and thriving, the weeds removed with their roots intact. His hands still hurt, but the bleeding had stopped. His back still ached, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He stood and looked at his morning's work. So little done, so much remaining. But he was not discouraged. He understood now. This was not a task to be completed, a problem to be solved, a test to be passed. This was practice, daily, patient, gentle practice. Tomorrow he would return. And the day after. And the day after that. The weeds would grow back, and he would tend them again. This was not failure. This was the path. As he washed his hands in the cold water from the well, watching the dirt and blood swirl away, Tenzin realized something profound. He had come to this monastery seeking teachings about the nature of mind, about emptiness, about enlightenment. And Lama Dorje had given him exactly that, not through words, not through texts, but through dirt and weeds and blistered hands. The garden was his mind. The weeds were his afflictions. And the practice was not to violently eradicate them, but to tend them with patience and compassion day after day, moment after moment, without hatred, without judgment, without the violence of perfectionism. This was the Dharma. This was the path. Not in some distant monastery or ancient text, but here, in this overgrown garden, in these bleeding hands, in this moment of understanding. Tenzin bowed toward the garden, a gesture of gratitude and respect. Then he walked toward the dining hall, ready to continue his training, ready to tend whatever garden the Lama would show him next. 3 weeks had passed since Tenzin arrived at Tashigompa, and he had fallen into a rhythm rising before dawn to the sound of the Dungchen morning meditation in the temple hours tending the garden afternoon study evening prayers. The garden was slowly transforming under his patient care, and so was he. The blisters on his hands had become calluses. The ache in his back had become strength. And something in his mind was beginning to settle, like silt sinking to the bottom of a clear mountain lake. On this particular morning, Tenzin was finishing his meditation when the peace of the temple was shattered by the sound of shouting. A man's voice, loud and furious, echoed across the courtyard, bouncing off the ancient stone walls. "Where is the Lama? I demand to see him. Someone answer me." Tenzin opened his eyes, his heart suddenly racing. In his 3 weeks at the monastery, he had never heard such anger within these walls. The place had been a sanctuary of quiet and peace. Now someone had brought a storm inside. He rose from his cushion and hurried toward the sound, his curiosity mixed with concern. He reached the courtyard to find a man pacing near the gate like a caged animal. The visitor wore expensive tuba robes of fine wool, now dusty from travel, and his face was flushed red with rage, despite the cool mountain air. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. His eyes darted around wildly, looking for someone to direct his fury toward. A servant stood nearby, holding the reins of 2 horses, looking uncomfortable and afraid. "You!" the man shouted when he saw Tenzin. "Are you deaf? I said I need to see the Lama. Where is he?" Tenzin felt his own body tense, his chest tighten. The man's anger was like heat from a fire, and Tenzin could feel it affecting him, disturbing the peace he had cultivated over the past weeks. His mind began to race with thoughts. This man is disturbing the peace. He's being disrespectful. Someone should tell him this is a monastery, not a marketplace. He can't just come here and shout like this. Who does he think he is? "The Lama is," Tenzin began, but the man cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't have time for your stammering. My life is falling apart. I need answers, and I need them now." The man's voice cracked slightly, and Tenzin realized that beneath the anger was something else. Pain, fear, desperation, the raw wound of betrayal. Before Tenzin could respond, a calm voice spoke from behind him. "I am here." Lama Dorje emerged from the temple, his face as serene as still water, as peaceful as the mountains themselves. He did not hurry. He did not show any sign of alarm or irritation at the shouting. He simply walked slowly across the courtyard, his walking stick tapping against the stones, his presence like a cool breeze entering a hot room like shade in the desert. The merchant, for that's what he appeared to be judging by his fine clothes and the quality of his horses, whirled to face the Lama. Finally, "Are you Dorje, the one they say understands the Buddha's teachings? The one who spent 20 years in retreat?" "I am called Dorje," the Lama replied quietly, his voice barely above a conversational tone. "And you are welcome here, friend." "Welcome." The man's voice rose even higher, echoing off the monastery walls. "I don't need to be welcomed. I need answers. I need to understand why the Buddha allows good people to suffer while evil people prosper. My business partner, my friend, or so I thought, has stolen from me. He has taken everything: my fortune, my reputation, my family's good name. He has left me with nothing but shame and debt that will take generations to repay." The merchant's hands shook as he spoke. Spittle flew from his mouth. His whole body trembled with the force of his rage, like a mountain shaking before an avalanche. Where is the justice in that? Where is the karma everyone speaks of? Where is the dharma? Your Buddha teaches that good actions bring good results. But I have been honest my whole life. I have never cheated anyone, never lied in business, never broken my word, and look what it has brought me. Ruin, betrayal, suffering, while he, the thief, walks free and unpunished. Tenzin watched fascinated and disturbed as the man's anger filled the courtyard, like smoke, thick and choking. He expected Lama Dorje to respond with arguments to defend the Dharma, to explain the complexities of karma and how it works across lifetimes, or perhaps to ask the man to leave, to take his anger elsewhere, to not disturb the peace of the monastery. But the Lama did neither. He simply stood present and calm his face, showing neither judgment nor fear, neither agreement nor disagreement. He did not react to the shouting. He did not become defensive. He did not try to fix or change anything. He was like a mountain, unmoved by the storm, raging around it, yet not cold or indifferent. There was compassion in his stillness, a kind of spacious acceptance that allowed the man's anger to exist without being absorbed by it, without being amplified by it. The merchant continued to rage, his voice growing hoarse, but gradually with no one fighting back, no one arguing with him, no one giving his anger fuel. His fury began to exhaust itself. His voice grew quieter. His gestures became less wild. Finally, he stopped breathing heavily, looking at the Lama, with confusion written across his face. "Wow, why don't you say something?" The merchant asked, his voice now more bewildered than angry. "Why don't you defend your precious Dharma? Why don't you argue with me?" Lama Dorje smiled gently, warmly. "You have traveled far to bring your anger here. You must be tired. Would you like some tea?" The merchant stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language, as if the Lama had suddenly transformed into something incomprehensible. "Tea. Did you hear nothing I said? My life is destroyed. My family is disgraced. My children will grow up in poverty because of what he did. And you offer me tea?" "Yes," the Lama said simply, his tone as natural as if he were discussing the weather. "Come, sit. Let us drink tea together." He turned and walked toward a small pavilion at the edge of the courtyard, not looking back to see if the merchant would follow, not waiting for agreement. After a moment of hesitation, the man did follow, his anger now mixed with confusion, his certainty shaken. Tenzin followed at a distance, drawn by curiosity and a desire to understand how the Lama would handle this situation, how he would respond to such raw pain and fury. Lama Dorje prepared tea with his usual mindful care, his movements slow and deliberate, as if this were the most important task in the world. He lit a small fire-heated water in a copper pot, added tea leaves and salt and a pat of yak butter, churning it all together in the traditional way. He poured the rich frothy tea into 2 wooden bowls. He offered one to the merchant, who took it automatically, still looking bewildered, still trying to understand what was happening. "Tell me," the Lama said, settling onto a cushion with a soft sigh. "Who suffers most from your anger right now? Your business partner who betrayed you or you yourself?" The merchant opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. His hands, Tenzin noticed, were shaking so badly that tea sloshed over the rim of his bowl, staining his expensive robes. His face was still flushed, his breathing rapid and shallow. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Speaking of sleepless nights and endless worry, I haven't slept in 7 days, the merchant said quietly, the admission seeming to surprise even himself. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I imagine what I would say to him, what I would do to him if I could. I plan my revenge in 1,000 different ways. My chest feels like there's a stone crushing it. My stomach burns. I can't eat. I can't rest. I can't think of anything else. My wife says I'm becoming a stranger, that she doesn't recognize me anymore." "And your partner?" Lama Dorje asked gently, his voice soft with compassion. "Is he suffering like this?" The merchant's face twisted with pain and rage. "No, he's probably sleeping soundly, enjoying the money he stole from me, laughing at how easily he deceived me. So your anger is punishing him?" "No!" The merchant admitted, his voice breaking, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "It's punishing me. Only me." Lama Dorje nodded slowly, his expression full of understanding and compassion. The Buddha taught something important about anger. He said that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The coal doesn't care who you intend to throw it at. It burns your hand, regardless. The merchant looked down at his shaking hands, at the tea he couldn't drink, because his body was so tense, so consumed by rage and pain. Tears began to roll down his cheeks, cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Your partner's actions were his karma. The Lama continued, his voice soft and compassionate, like a father speaking to a wounded child. The seeds he planted, those seeds will bear fruit in their own time. That is the nature of cause and effect, as certain as water flowing downhill. You cannot control that. You cannot make his karma ripen faster or slower. But your anger, that is your karma. Those are seeds you are planting right now in this present moment. And look at the fruit they are already bearing. He gestured to the merchant's trembling hands, his exhausted face, his tear-stained robes. You are destroying yourself. Not because of what he did, that is in the past, it is finished. But because of what you are doing to yourself now, in this moment, with this anger, you are feeding and nurturing like a fire. The merchant wept openly now, his whole body shaking with sobs, years of control and dignity falling away. "I'm so tired," he whispered. "I'm so tired of being angry, but I don't know how to stop. He wronged me. Doesn't he deserve my anger? Doesn't justice demand it? Perhaps he does deserve anger." Lama Dorje said, his tone neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "But do you deserve to suffer like this? His betrayal happened in the past. It is done. You cannot change it by being angry, but your suffering is happening right now in this present moment. And it is not being created by him, it is being created by the fire you continue to feed in your own heart. The merchant looked up, his face wet with tears, his eyes red and swollen. But if I let go of my anger, doesn't that mean he wins? Doesn't that mean what he did was acceptable? Doesn't that make me weak? Letting go of anger does not mean accepting injustice. The Lama replied, his voice firm but kind. You can still seek legal remedy. You can still protect yourself and your family from future harm. You can still speak truth about what happened. You can still pursue justice through proper channels. But you can do all of these things without burning yourself alive with rage. The Buddha taught that hatred never ceases by hatred, but only by love. This is an eternal law as unchangeable as the rising of the sun. Lama Dorje refilled the merchant's bowl with fresh tea, the gesture tender and caring. Your anger feels powerful. It feels like strength, like you are doing something, like you are fighting back. But look honestly, has it changed anything? Has it undone the betrayal? Has it restored your fortune? Has it brought you any peace or justice? The merchant shook his head slowly, the movement heavy with defeat and recognition. No, it has only made everything worse. I've been so consumed by rage that I haven't been able to think clearly to plan to take care of my family. I've been so focused on him that I've neglected everything else in my life. My wife, my children, my remaining business, all suffering because I can't let go of this burning coal. Yes, the Lama said gently, his eyes full of compassion. This is what anger does. It promises us power, but delivers only suffering. It promises us justice, but delivers only poison. The Buddha taught that we must learn to respond to wrongdoing with wisdom, not with rage. Wisdom sees clearly and acts appropriately. Rage blinds us and makes us act foolishly, destroying ourselves in the process. They sat in silence for a while, the merchant sipping his tea, his breathing gradually slowing, his body beginning to relax as the rage drained away like water from a broken vessel. Tenzin watched from his position near the pavilion, marveling at the transformation. The man who'd arrived like a hurricane was becoming calm, like a storm that had blown itself out, leaving only clear sky behind. Stay here today, Lama Dorje said, his voice gentle. Rest, eat, sit with us in meditation. Let the fire in your heart begin to cool. Then tomorrow you can return to your life and do what needs to be done, but from a place of clarity, not from a place of rage. From wisdom, not from hatred. The merchant nodded, too exhausted to argue, too broken to resist. Thank you, Lama. I'm sorry for shouting. I'm sorry for bringing such disturbance to your peaceful monastery. Ati, there is nothing to forgive, the Lama said, smiling warmly. You brought your suffering here, and that is what this place is for, to help ease suffering. You are welcome here, as welcome as anyone who seeks peace. As the merchant was led away by another monk to rest, Tenzin approached Lama Dorje. His mind was full of questions, but one rose above the others, demanding to be asked. Lama, how did you remain so calm? His anger was so intense, so overwhelming. I felt it affecting me, making my own heart race. My own thoughts become agitated, my own judgments arise. But you were like a mountain. How Lama Dorje looked at him with kind eyes, eyes that had seen much suffering and learned to meet it with compassion. I did not absorb his anger, Tenzin. I did not take it into myself. His anger was his. It belonged to him, not to me. I could see it, acknowledge it, have compassion for the suffering it was causing him. But I did not need to make it mine. But how? Tenzin pressed, genuinely confused. How do you not absorb someone else's emotions when they're so powerful, so intense? It seems impossible. By remaining rooted in your own center, the Lama replied, his voice taking on the tone of teaching. By understanding that emotions are like weather, they arise, they pass, but they are not who we are. His anger was a storm passing through him. I did not need to become part of that storm. I could simply stand steady and offer shelter until it passed. He placed a hand on Tenzin's shoulder, the touch warm and grounding. This is one of the most important practices, learning not to be swept away by others' emotions while still remaining compassionate. It is the difference between empathy and absorption. Empathy says, I see your suffering and I care. Absorption says, your suffering is now my suffering. One is helpful. The other simply creates more suffering in the world. Tenzin thought about this as he returned to his garden work, the Lama's words echoing in his mind. He had felt the merchant's anger like a physical force, and it had disturbed his own peace, created his own judgments and reactions. But Lama Dorje had remained like still water, reflecting the anger, but not becoming angry himself, showing compassion without being consumed by the other's pain. That evening, Tenzin saw the merchant sitting in meditation with the other monks in the temple. His face was peaceful. His body relaxed, his hands steady as they held his prayer beads. The fire had cooled. The storm had passed. And Tenzin understood something profound. True. Strength is not in reacting to others' emotions. True strength is in maintaining your own inner peace, your own center, and offering that peace as a refuge for those who are lost in the storm of their own minds. As the butter lamps flickered and the monks chanted the evening prayers, Tenzin felt grateful for this teaching, for this teacher, for this path that was showing him not just how to find peace for himself, but how to remain peaceful in the presence of others' suffering. This was the Bodhisattva way, the way of compassion that doesn't drown in the ocean of suffering, but offers a boat to those who are drowning. The next morning, the merchant departed, bowing deeply to Lama Dorje. His eyes clear, his step lighter. He still had problems to face, justice, to seek a life to rebuild. But he was no longer carrying the hot coal of rage. He had put it down, and in doing so, had freed his hands to actually do something useful. Tenzin watched him go, then returned to his garden, ready for whatever weeds would grow today. Tenzin had carried his alms bowl since the day of his ordination 8 years ago in a monastery far below in the valleys. It was a simple bowl made of wood, dark and smooth from years of use, but to him it was precious beyond measure. His root teacher had placed it in his hands during the ordination ceremony, saying, "This bowl represents your commitment to the path. Care for it as you care for your practice. It will accompany you through your journey to enlightenment." And Tenzin had cared for it. Every evening he washed it carefully with sand, and water dried it thoroughly with a clean cloth, rubbed it with a bit of oil to preserve the wood, wrapped it in a piece of silk. The bowl had accompanied him through years of study, through countless meals received in mindfulness, through his journey to this mountain monastery. Its weight in his hands had become familiar, comforting, like an old friend. The smooth rim against his lips each morning reminded him of who he was: a monk, a seeker, a practitioner of the Buddha's way. On this particular morning, 5 weeks into his stay at Tashigompa, Tenzin rose early to wash his bowl at the well before the morning meal. The sun had not yet risen, and the courtyard was still dim in the pre-dawn light, the stars still visible in the vast sky above. He drew water from the well, the rope creaking as the bucket descended into the darkness below, then rose heavy with icy water. He poured it into his bowl and began to clean it with mindful attention, just as he had done thousands of times before the ritual, as familiar as breathing. But his hands were still wet from drawing the water, and perhaps his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the garden work ahead, or the teaching he had witnessed yesterday with the angry merchant, or the meditation instruction Lama Dorje had given him the evening before. Whatever the reason, as he lifted the bowl to rinse it one final time, it slipped from his wet fingers. Time seemed to slow. Tenzin watched helpless as the bowl fell from his hands. It tumbled through the air, turning once, twice, catching the first light of dawn. Then it struck the stone edge of the well with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtyard, like a gunshot, like the breaking of his heart. The bowl split cleanly in half. Tenzin stood frozen, staring at the two pieces lying on the ground. For a moment, his mind went completely blank, unable to process what had just happened. Then a wave of emotion crashed over him. Shock, disbelief, and a grief so sudden and intense it took his breath away, made his legs weak. He knelt and picked up the two halves with trembling hands, holding them like the broken pieces of his own heart. The break was clean, running straight through the center of the bowl, through the very middle where he had eaten countless meals. The bowl that had been whole just moments ago was now irreparably broken. No amount of glue or skill could make it whole again. It was finished, dead, gone. Tears came unbidden, rolling down Tenzin's cheeks, hot against his cold skin. He felt foolish for crying over a bowl. It was just an object, just a piece of wood, but he couldn't stop. It wasn't just a bowl. It was a connection to his ordination, to his root teacher, who had since passed away, to his identity as a monk, to 8 years of practice and dedication. It was a symbol of everything he had committed himself to, and now it was broken. And somehow that felt like he was broken too, like his practice was broken, like everything was falling apart. I wasn't mindful enough. He thought, his chest tight with shame and self-recrimination. I was careless. I was distracted. I failed. A true practitioner would never let this happen. Lama Dorje would never drop his bowl. What kind of monk am I? How can I claim to be practicing mindfulness when I can't even hold onto a simple bowl? He sat there by the well, holding the broken pieces, lost in a spiral of self-judgment and grief, drowning in the story his mind was creating about what this meant, about what kind of person he was, about his unworthiness. He didn't hear Lama Dorje approach, until the old Lama was standing beside him, his presence like a gentle hand on a troubled brow. "Ah," the Lama said softly, looking at the broken bowl with interest rather than disappointment. "May I see?" Tenzin handed him the pieces, unable to speak, his throat tight with unshed tears and shame. Master Dorje took them gently, turning them over in his weathered hands, examining the break with careful attention, running his fingers along the split wood. Tenzin waited for the disappointment, the lecture about mindfulness, the reminder to be more careful, the confirmation that he had failed. But instead, the Lama smiled. Not a mocking smile, not a pitying smile, but one of genuine warmth and interest, as if Tenzin had shown him something fascinating rather than something broken. "Look," he said, tracing the edge of the break with his finger. "See how the fracture reveals the bowl's inner nature. The grain of the wood, the rings showing its age, the way it was carved from a single piece. When the bowl was whole, you could not see any of this. It was hidden." Tenzin looked at the broken edge through his tears. The Lama was right. The cross-section showed the bowl's hidden structure, the evidence of how it had been made, the marks of time and use that had shaped it, the very essence of the tree it had once been. Lama Dorje stood slowly, his joints creaking in the cold morning air, and walked to a shelf near the temple entrance. He placed the two halves there side by side where the morning light would catch them, arranging them with care as if they were precious relics. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent, anicca. This bowl was never permanent, Tenzin. From the moment it was created from the tree, from the moment the carpenter shaped it, it was moving toward this moment of breaking. This is not a tragedy. This is simply the nature of all things. Everything that comes together must come apart. Everything born must die. "But Lama," Tenzin said, his voice thick with emotion, struggling to understand, "I've had this bowl since my ordination. It was given to me by my root teacher. It was important to me. It connected me to him, to my vows, to my practice. And I broke it through carelessness, through lack of mindfulness. I failed." "Did you break it on purpose?" The Lama asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. "No, of course not. Then it was not carelessness, it was simply what happened. Your hands were wet. The bowl slipped. This is the nature of physical reality. Things fall, things break. Hands get wet and lose their grip. This is not a moral failing. This is not evidence of bad practice. This is just what happened." Lama Dorje sat down beside Tenzin on the edge of the well, settling himself with a soft grunt. "Tell me, why are you really crying? Is it about the bowl itself, or about something else?" Tenzin was quiet for a long moment, looking inward past the surface grief to the deeper pain beneath. I think I'm crying because I believed it would last forever. I know the teaching about impermanence. I've studied it, recited it, even taught it to younger monks, but I didn't really understand it, not in my heart. I thought this bowl would always be with me, that it would be part of my journey to enlightenment, that I would use it for decades, maybe pass it on to a student someday. And now it's gone. And that feels like I've lost something I can never get back. Like a piece of my past is gone. Like my connection to my teacher is severed. "Yes," the Lama said gently, his voice full of understanding. "This is the suffering the Buddha spoke of, dukkha. We suffer not because things are impermanent, but because we cling to them as if they were permanent. We suffer not because the bowl broke, but because you believed it wouldn't. You attached your identity to it, your sense of security, your connection to your past and your teacher. And when it broke, all of that attachment became suffering." Tenzin wiped his eyes with his sleeve, feeling the truth of the words, but still struggling with the pain. "So I shouldn't have cared about it at all. Should I not care about anything?" No, Lama Dorje said, shaking his head emphatically. The teaching is not to stop caring, not to stop loving. The teaching is to love things fully while understanding their true nature, to appreciate them completely while knowing they will not last. This is the difference between attachment and appreciation, between clinging and loving. He gestured to the broken bowl on the shelf, now illuminated by the rising sun. You can love that bowl for what it was, for the service it provided, for the memories it holds, for the connection it represented to your teacher. But you must also accept that it was always temporary, always changing, always moving toward dissolution. Everything is. This body you inhabit, temporary. This monastery, temporary. Even these mountains, which seem so eternal, are slowly being worn away by wind and rain and ice. The Buddha himself grew old, became sick, and died. His body broke just like your bowl. Nothing escapes impermanence. Nothing. There, then what's the point? Tenzin asked, a note of despair in his voice, the question rising from a deep place of confusion. If everything ends, if nothing lasts, why care about anything? Why practice? Why try? Why love anything, if we're just going to lose it? Lama Dorje smiled, his eyes twinkling with something like joy. Because impermanence is not sad, Tenzin. It is beautiful. It is what makes life precious. If this bowl had lasted forever, would you have treasured it as you did? If flowers never wilted, would we marvel at their blooming? If we lived forever, would we appreciate each day? Impermanence is what gives life its poignancy, its depth, its meaning. It is what makes each moment precious, each encounter sacred, each breath a gift. He stood and walked back to the shelf, picking up one half of the broken bowl with reverence. And look, even in its brokenness, it still has purpose. Watch. The Lama carried the half bowl to the temple and placed it on the altar before the Buddha statue. He filled it with water from the offering vessel and set it among the other offerings: flowers, incense, butter lamps. The water sat perfectly in the curved half, reflecting the flickering lamplight, becoming part of the sacred display. It's me. It is no longer a bowl for eating, Lama Dorje said, returning to Tenzin's side. But it can still hold water for offerings. It can still serve the dharma. Its form has changed, but it has not ceased to be useful. Perhaps this is another teaching that even when things break, even when they change beyond recognition, they can still have value and purpose. They can still serve. Nothing is wasted in the dharma. Over the following days, Tenzin found himself visiting the shelf where the broken bowl sat, drawn to it like a pilgrim to a shrine. Lama Dorje used both halves as offering vessels, filling them with water each morning for the altar, sometimes placing flowers in them, once using one half to hold incense ash. The broken bowl became more interesting than the whole one had been, more teaching than tool. Its brokenness revealed its nature. Its change revealed its adaptability. Its imperfection revealed its perfection. And gradually, Tenzin's grief transformed into something else, a deeper understanding of what the Buddha had taught, not just intellectually, but in his bones, in his heart. He began to see impermanence everywhere, in the changing seasons, in the melting snow, in the growing plants in his garden, in the aging faces of the monks, in his own reflection, in the water. Everything was breaking, changing, moving toward dissolution. And this was not tragedy. This was simply truth. One morning, a week after the bowl had broken, Lama Dorje presented Tenzin with a new bowl. It was similar to the old one, simple wood, unadorned, functional. "For your meals," the Lama said, placing it in Tenzin's hands with a slight bow. Tenzin took it with gratitude, bowing deeply in return. But he held this new bowl differently than he had held the old one. He appreciated its smooth surface, its perfect roundness, its utility. But he also knew, truly knew, not just intellectually, but in his bones, that this bowl, too, would one day break. Everything did. And that knowledge, rather than making him sad, made him treasure it more. He held it carefully, not from fear of breaking it, but from appreciation for having it now in this moment. He used it mindfully, not to make it last forever, but to honor it while it was here. And when he set it down each evening, he did so with a kind of gentle release, knowing that he could not control whether it would survive the night, whether it would be here tomorrow, whether it would last a year, or a decade, or a lifetime. This was the teaching of the broken bowl, not to love less, but to love more freely. Not to stop caring, but to care without the desperate clinging that turns love into suffering. To hold things lightly, appreciate them fully, and release them gracefully when the time comes. Because the time always comes. For bowls, for bodies, for relationships, for life itself. Nothing lasts forever. And in accepting this truth, truly accepting it, not just knowing it, we find a strange and unexpected freedom. The freedom to love without fear. The freedom to appreciate without possessing. The freedom to live fully, knowing that life is temporary, and that its very temporariness is what makes it precious, what makes this moment sacred, what makes this breath a miracle. Tenzin placed his new bowl on the shelf beside his sleeping mat. Tomorrow he would use it for the first time. But tonight he sat in meditation, and when he closed his eyes, he saw not the broken bowl, but the teaching it had given him, that everything breaks, everything changes, everything passes away, and that this is not sad, this is not wrong, this is not failure. This is simply the nature of existence, and in accepting it, we find peace. Not the peace of permanence, but the peace of flowing with change. Not the peace of control, but the peace of surrender. Not the peace of holding on, but the peace of letting go. The butter lamp flickered on his small altar. Outside, the wind carried the sound of prayer flags, snapping their mantras, flying to the heavens. And Tenzin sat, breathing present alive, holding nothing, losing nothing, at peace with the impermanence that makes all things precious. The lesson of the broken bowl had settled into Tenzin's heart, like a seed finding fertile soil, and he continued his practice with renewed understanding. 6 weeks had passed since his arrival at Tashigompa, and he had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, the deep horn calling him. To dawn. Meditation hours in the garden. Watching weeds and vegetables grow afternoon teachings with Lama Dorje. Evening prayers as butter lamps flickered and incense smoke rose toward the ancient rafters. But on the morning that would begin the 7th week, something changed. Tenzin entered the temple for morning meditation, bowing to the altar with its golden Buddha statue and rows of offering bowls. Lama Dorje sat in his usual place perfectly still, his form barely visible in the dim light of the butter lamps. Tenzin prostrated 3 times, as was customary, then took his seat on his cushion and settled into meditation posture. "Good morning, Lama," he said softly as he did every morning. Silence. Tenzin opened his eyes slightly. Perhaps the Lama was deep in meditation and hadn't heard. He closed his eyes again and turned his attention to his breath, letting the silence deepen around him. After the meditation session ended, the monks filed out for morning chores. Tenzin approached Lama Dorje to ask about the day's garden work, as had become their custom. Lama, should I continue clearing the south section today, or... But Lama Dorje walked past him without a word, without even a glance, his eyes looking straight ahead, as if Tenzin were invisible, as if he were nothing more than air. Tenzin stood there, confused, his question hanging unanswered in the empty temple. Had he done something wrong? Had he offended the Lama somehow? At breakfast, the monks gathered in the dining hall for their morning tsampa and butter tea. Lama Dorje sat in his place at the head of the room but did not speak. Not to Tenzin, not to any of the other monks. He ate his simple meal in complete silence, his eyes downcast, then rose and left without a word. The other monks exchanged glances but said nothing. This was unusual, but Lama Dorje was known for his unconventional teaching methods. They had learned to trust his wisdom even when they didn't understand his actions. The day passed. Tenzin worked in the garden, swept the courtyard, studied in his room. Each time he saw the Lama, he hoped for some acknowledgement, some word of guidance, some sign that everything was normal. But Lama Dorje moved through the monastery like a ghost, present, but unreachable, visible, but silent. He did not speak. He did not make eye contact. He did not respond to questions or greetings. He performed his duties, tending the altar, spinning the prayer wheels, leading the evening prayers, but all in complete silence. By evening, Tenzin's confusion had ripened into anxiety. What had he done? Had he been disrespectful in some way? Was this a punishment? He reviewed the past few days in his mind, searching for his mistake, replaying every interaction, every word, every gesture. Had he been lazy in his practice? Too proud of his progress in the garden? Had he said something inappropriate? The second day of silence was harder. Tenzin found himself watching the Lama, constantly looking for any sign, any clue, any hint of what was happening. During meditation, he couldn't concentrate. His mind spun with questions and theories, creating elaborate stories about what this meant. During meals, he barely tasted his food, too preoccupied with trying to catch the Lama's eye, trying to read some meaning in his teacher's face. During work, his hands moved automatically while his thoughts churned like a butter churn around and around, getting nowhere. He's testing me, Tenzin decided, pulling weeds with unnecessary force. He wants to see if I'm patient enough, humble enough, devoted enough. I need to show him I can accept this without complaint. I need to prove myself worthy. But by the third day, patience was wearing thin. The silence felt oppressive, heavy, like a weight pressing down on his chest. Tenzin's mind had moved from anxiety to frustration. Why wouldn't the Lama just tell him what he'd done wrong? How was he supposed to learn from this? What was the point of having a teacher who wouldn't teach? This seemed cruel, arbitrary, like a game with rules he didn't understand. He tried to focus on his practice, but his meditation was scattered, his mind like a wild horse refusing to be tamed. He sat on his cushion, but his mind was anywhere but present. It was in the past, reviewing every interaction with the Lama, searching for his error, analyzing every moment. It was in the future, imagining when the silence would end, what the Lama would finally say, how he would explain this test. It was creating elaborate stories about what this all meant, building castles of interpretation on foundations of nothing. On the fourth day, frustration turned to something darker, resentment. This is cruel, Tenzin thought as he worked in the garden, yanking weeds with anger, his movements harsh and violent. I came here to learn, and he's playing games with me. I left everything behind to study. With him, my monastery, my friends, my comfortable life. And this is how he treats me. Maybe I should just leave. Maybe this whole thing was a mistake. Maybe Lama Dorje isn't as enlightened as everyone says. Maybe he's just a crazy old man living on a mountain. His mind became a constant stream of complaints and judgments, a river of negativity that flowed without ceasing. The Lama was being unreasonable. This wasn't teaching. It was manipulation. It was abuse of power. Other teachers didn't treat their students this way. Maybe Lama Dorje was testing him. But maybe the test was to see if Tenzin was smart enough to recognize bad teaching and leave. Maybe Tenzin stopped mid-thought, his hand frozen on a weed, suddenly hearing himself, really hearing the voice in his head for the first time. For 4 days, it had been talking non-stop, creating stories, making judgments, spinning theories, building resentments, generating an endless stream of mental noise. It had been so loud, so constant, so overwhelming, that he hadn't even noticed it was there, like someone living next to a waterfall who no longer hears the water. The Lama was silent, but Tenzin's mind was screaming. He sat back on his heels in the garden, stunned by this realization, the weed forgotten in his hand. The noise wasn't outside, it was inside. Lama Dorje hadn't said a word in 4 days, but Tenzin's internal dialogue hadn't stopped for a single moment. Question after question, story after story, judgment after judgment. His mind had been like a marketplace, crowded, chaotic, exhausting, never quiet, never still. On the 5th day, something shifted. Tenzin stopped trying to figure out what the Lama was doing. He stopped creating stories about it. He stopped waiting for the silence to end. Instead, he simply accepted it. The Lama was silent. That was what was happening. Nothing more, nothing less. No hidden meaning, no secret test, no punishment or reward. Just silence. And in that acceptance, Tenzin began to notice something extraordinary. Without the Lama's words to focus on, without guidance to follow, or teachings to analyze, he had to turn inward. He had to find his own way. And in doing so, he began to hear things he had never heard before. He heard the wind moving through the prayer flags, not just as background noise, but as a living presence, a constant song, each flag singing its own note in the mountain breeze. He heard the water flowing in the fountain, each drop distinct and clear, a symphony of liquid sound. He heard birds calling to each other at dawn, their voices sharp and bright in the thin mountain air, conversations in a language beyond words. He heard his own footsteps on the stone path, the rustle of his robes, the sound of his breath moving in and out, the beating of his heart, the blood flowing through his veins. The world, he realized, was not silent at all. It was full of sound, full of life, full of teaching. He had just been too busy listening to his own mental chatter to notice, too caught up in the noise of his own thinking, to hear the wisdom that was always present, always available. always speaking in the language of direct experience. On the 6th day, Tenzin sat in meditation, and something remarkable happened. His mind became quiet. Not forced quiet, not the quiet of suppression or control, but a natural settling, like mud sinking to the bottom of a clear mountain lake, like snow coming to rest after a storm. And in that quiet, there was a spaciousness he had never experienced before, a vastness like the sky itself. Thoughts still arose, but they were like clouds passing through that vast sky present, but not overwhelming visible, but not solid coming and going without disturbing the essential spaciousness. He sat for an hour, maybe more, lost in that spacious silence, that pregnant emptiness that was somehow more full than any fullness he had known. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt more rested than he had in years. Not the rest of sleep, but the rest of a mind that has stopped struggling, stopped grasping, stopped creating endless noise. The rest of coming home to silence. That evening, Tenzin was sweeping the courtyard, moving the broom in rhythm with his breath. Each stroke a meditation when Lama Dorje approached. The old Lama stood beside him for a moment, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the sky turning shades of orange and pink and purple, the first stars beginning to appear. Then for the first time in 7 days, he spoke. "What did you learn?" His voice was soft, but after so much silence, it seemed loud, almost startling. Tenzin set down his broom and considered the question carefully, wanting to honor the teaching with an honest answer. "I learned that I was never alone," he said, slowly choosing his word with care. "I thought the silence was empty, but it was full of sounds I never noticed because my own thoughts were too loud. Full of presence I never felt because I was always distracted by words yours or mine, or the endless commentary in my own head." Lama Dorje nodded, a slight smile appearing on his weathered face. "What else?" "I learned that the teaching was happening every moment. The wind was teaching, the birds were teaching, the water was teaching, my own breath was teaching. But I couldn't hear any of it through the noise in my own head, through the constant stream of thinking and judging and storytelling." "Yes," the Lama said, his smile widening. "And..." Tenzin was quiet for a long moment, looking inward, touching the deepest truth he had discovered. "I learned that I don't need constant guidance from outside, that I have my own wisdom, my own knowing, my own inner teacher. I was so dependent on your words, on external teaching, on someone else telling me what to do and think and understand, that I never learned to listen to the teacher within, to trust my own direct experience." Lama Dorje's smile became radiant, his whole face lighting up with joy. The Buddha himself often taught through noble silence, mauna. When asked certain questions about the ultimate nature of reality, about what happens after death, about the existence of a self, he would sometimes simply sit in silence. "Do you know why?" "Because some truths cannot be spoken," Tenzin ventured. "Yes, but also because words are like fingers pointing at the moon. They can indicate the direction, but they are not the moon itself. Many students spend their whole lives studying the finger, memorizing teachings, analyzing concepts, debating philosophy, accumulating knowledge. But they never look at the moon. They never experience the truth directly. They mistake the map for the territory, the menu for the meal." The Lama picked up a fallen leaf from the ground and held it up to the fading light, its veins visible like a map of rivers. "I can tell you this leaf is impermanent. I can explain the doctrine of Anicca in great detail. I can quote sutras about the nature of change. But until you sit in silence and actually watch this leaf, see its color fading, feel its texture becoming brittle, witness its slow return to the earth, you don't truly understand. You just have concepts about understanding ideas about ideas. He let the leaf fall, watching it drift to the ground. These 7 days, you learn to look beyond the finger. You learn that silence is not empty, it is full. Full of presence, full of teaching, full of truth that cannot be captured in words. You learn to listen, not with your ears, but with your whole being. Tenzin felt tears prick his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of gratitude, of something opening in his heart. Thank you, Lama. I was angry with you. I thought you were being cruel, that you had abandoned me. I know, Lama Dorje said gently, his voice full of compassion. And that anger was also a teaching. It showed you how much noise your mind creates when it doesn't get what it wants, when reality doesn't match your expectations. How quickly it builds stories and judgments. How it suffers, not from what is happening, but from its resistance to what is happening, from its demand that things be different. They stood together in the courtyard as darkness fell, the stars emerging one by one in the vast sky above. The evening stars began to appear brilliant in the thin mountain air, and in the silence between them, a comfortable silence, now a rich silence, a silence full of understanding. Tenzin understood something profound. The greatest teachings cannot be spoken. They must be lived, felt, experienced directly. Words can point the way, but they cannot walk the path for us. Teachers can guide, but they cannot give us their realization. Each person must make the journey themselves, must find their own way through the silence, to the truth that lives beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond the endless chatter of the thinking mind. Lama Dorje had not abandoned him during those 7 days. He had given him the greatest gift a teacher can give, the space to discover his own wisdom, the silence in which his own inner teacher could finally be heard, the opportunity to stop depending on external guidance and to find the source of wisdom within himself. As the monastery bell rang for evening prayers, Tenzin bowed deeply to his teacher, pressing his forehead to the ground in the traditional gesture of profound respect and gratitude. When he rose, Lama Dorje was smiling that radiant smile, the smile of someone who has guided another soul toward the light. They walked together to the temple, their footsteps in harmony, their silence now a shared understanding rather than a barrier. And Tenzin knew that this teaching, the teaching of silence, would stay with him forever. A reminder that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from words, but from the space between them, not from speaking, but from listening, not from the noise of teaching, but from the silence in which truth can finally be heard. The teaching of silence had opened something in Tenzin, like a door he hadn't known was closed. In the days following Lama Dorje's 7 days of silence, Tenzin found himself more present, more aware, less caught in the endless stream of thinking. The voice in his head was still there, thoughts still arose, but now there was space around them, silence between them, and he no longer believed every story his mind told him. It was his 8th week at Tashigompa, and autumn was deepening in the mountains. The air grew colder each morning, and the first snows had dusted the highest peaks, making them shine like white jewels against the deep blue sky. Tenzin had settled into the rhythm of monastery life, and he was beginning to feel like he understood the path, like he was making real progress toward the peace he had come seeking. But that morning, Lama Dorje appeared at his door just after dawn, wrapped in a thick woolen cloak against the cold. "Come," he said simply, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Leave your work today. We are going to the river." They walked in silence down a steep path that wound through pine and juniper forest, the trees heavy with prayer flags that had been tied there by pilgrims over the years. The air was fragrant with resin and the sharp scent of mountain herbs. Birds called from the branches overhead, ravens and snow pigeons. After perhaps an hour of walking, descending from the monastery's high perch, they emerged at a place where the mountain stream widened into a small river flowing clear and cold over smooth stones. Lama Dorje sat down on a flat boulder near the water's edge, settling himself with a soft grunt. He gestured for Tenzin to sit beside him. Then he said nothing. He simply watched the water flow, his eyes following the movement of the current, his face peaceful and attentive. Tenzin sat and watched too, waiting for the teaching to begin, expecting the Lama to speak, to explain why they had come here. Minutes passed. The Lama remained silent, his eyes on the water. Tenzin began to feel restless. They had walked all this way just to sit and look at water. Surely there was something more he should be doing, some lesson, he should be learning, some practice, he should be performing. But he remembered the teaching of silence from the previous week. Perhaps this was similar. Perhaps he should simply be present with what was here without needing it to be different, without demanding explanation or instruction. So he settled himself and began to really watch the river, to give it his full attention. The water flowed steadily downstream, its surface catching the morning light, sparkling like scattered diamonds. In the middle of the river sat a large boulder, grey and ancient, worn smooth by countless years of water flowing past. The current divided when it reached the stone, flowing around both sides in smooth arcs, then reuniting below to continue its journey toward the distant valley. Tenzin noticed how the water never fought with the boulder. It didn't try to move it or push through it or complain about its presence. It simply accepted the obstacle and found a way around, adapting its path without hesitation, without resistance, without any apparent effort. The water flowed around the stone as naturally as breathing, as if this were the only possible response, the only sane response. He watched as a fallen log created another obstacle downstream. Again, the water didn't struggle or resist. It pooled behind the log, rose slightly, then spilled over the top in a small waterfall, continuing on its way with the same steady purpose. Every obstacle was met with the same response, acceptance and adaptation, flowing around what couldn't be moved through finding the path of least resistance without losing direction. "Ooh, what do you see?" Lama Dorje asked, his voice soft enough not to disturb the peace of the place, blending with the sound of flowing water. Tenzin considered carefully before answering, wanting to see truly, rather than just report what he thought the Lama wanted to hear. "I see water flowing around obstacles. It doesn't fight them. It doesn't resist them. It just adapts. It changes its path, but not its direction." "Yes, and what else?" Tenzin watched more closely, looking deeper. "The water is always moving toward the sea, toward the lowest point. Even when it has to go around rocks or over logs, it never stops moving in that direction. It never gives up its purpose. It never forgets where it's going. Good, the Lama said, nodding. The Buddha taught that we should be like water. Do you understand what this means? Tenzin thought about it, feeling for the teaching beneath the words. To be flexible, to adapt to circumstances, to flow around obstacles rather than fighting them. Yes, but more than that. Lama Dorje picked up a small stone and tossed it into the river. It sank immediately and the water closed over it, as if it had never been there, the surface smooth again within moments. Water accepts what it cannot change. It does not become angry at rocks for being in its path. It does not suffer because the way is not straight. It does not waste energy wishing the riverbed were different. It simply flows with what is adapting to reality rather than demanding that reality adapt to it. He gestured to the boulder in the middle of the stream, water flowing around it in endless curves. That stone has been there for perhaps 1,000 years. The water has flowed around it every day, every hour, every moment. And look, he pointed to the boulder's surface, worn smooth by the constant caress of water. Its edges rounded, its sharp corners long since dissolved. The water has shaped the stone, not through force, not through violence, not through anger or resistance, but through patient, persistent contact. Softness has overcome hardness. Flexibility has defeated rigidity. Tenzin stared at the boulder, seeing it with new eyes. Its surface was indeed smooth, polished by centuries of water flowing past. The hardest substance had been shaped by the softest. Strength had yielded to gentleness. Rigidity had been worn away by flexibility. This is Wu Wei. Lama Dorje continued using the ancient term. Effortless action. Not passive, not lazy, but aligned with the natural way of things. The water works constantly. It is always flowing, always moving, always accomplishing its purpose of reaching the sea. Yet, it does not strain. It does not force. It simply follows its nature, and in doing so, it achieves everything. A leaf fell from a tree overhead and landed on the water's surface. Tenzin watched as it was immediately caught by the current. The leaf didn't struggle or resist. It simply surrendered to the flow, and the river carried it effortlessly downstream around the boulder, over the log, toward the distant ocean. It moved with the water rather than against it, and in that surrender, it traveled farther than any amount of struggling could have taken it. You see, the Lama said, following Tenzin's gaze. The leaf does not fight the current. It does not try to swim upstream. It trusts the water to carry it where it needs to go. This is also a teaching about trust, about surrender, about working with reality rather than against it. Tenzin thought about his own life, his own practice the past 8 weeks at the monastery. How often did he fight against circumstances? How much energy did he waste resisting what he could not change? Just yesterday, it had rained during his garden time, and he had spent the entire morning frustrated, wishing for sunshine, resenting the weather for disrupting his plans, as if his resentment could change the clouds or stop the rain. Lama, he said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. I think I see. I spend so much time fighting against reality, wanting things to be different than they are. I exhaust myself trying to control situations I cannot control. I resist what is, and that resistance creates suffering. Yes, Lama Dorje said, his voice warm with approval. This is the suffering the Buddha spoke of. We create obstacles in our own minds, then struggle against them. We demand that the river of life flow in a straight line, and when it curves as it must, as it always does, we suffer. But the river was never meant to be straight. Curves are natural. Obstacles are natural. Change is natural. Resistance is optional. He stood and walked to the water's edge, dipping his hand in the cold current, letting the water flow through his fingers. The water teaches us acceptance, not passive acceptance, not giving up or becoming indifferent, but wise acceptance. The water accepts the rocks, yet it still flows. It accepts the obstacles, yet it still moves toward its destination. It works with what is, rather than wasting energy wishing for what isn't. Tenzin joined him at the water's edge, kneeling on the smooth stones, watching the endless flow. He noticed how the water adapted to every contour of the land, every stone in its path, every change in the riverbed. It was powerful, yet gentle, persistent, yet flexible, purposeful, yet effortless. It never fought reality. It simply flowed with it. But Lama? He asked a question arising from genuine confusion. How do we know when to accept and when to act? When to flow around an obstacle and when to try to change it? When is acceptance wisdom and when is it just giving up? Lama Dorje smiled, clearly pleased by the question. This is wisdom, discerning what can be changed and what cannot. Some obstacles are like this boulder. They have been here for 1,000 years and will be here for 1,000 more. To waste energy trying to move them is foolish. Better to flow around them and perhaps over time to shape them through patient contact, through gentle persistence. He picked up another stone, smaller this time, and placed it in the shallow water near the shore. But some obstacles are like this, temporary, movable. These we can address directly. We can pick them up and move them. The key is to see clearly what kind of obstacle we face and to respond with wisdom rather than blind force, with discernment rather than automatic reaction. They sat by the river for a long time, watching the water flow, listening to its constant song. Tenzin felt something releasing in his chest, some tight knot of resistance. He hadn't even known he was carrying some fundamental tension between himself and reality. He had been holding himself so rigid, trying to force his path, demanding that his practice unfold according to his expectations, fighting against every deviation from his plan. But perhaps the path was not meant to be straight. Perhaps obstacles were not failures, but opportunities to practice flexibility, to practice acceptance, to practice flowing like water. Perhaps the point was not to control the river, but to learn to flow with it, to move with its currents, rather than against them, to trust its wisdom, rather than imposing his own will. As they walked back up the mountain path, Tenzin felt lighter. The same steep trail that had seemed difficult on the way down now felt easier, not because it had changed, but because he had. He wasn't fighting it. He was simply walking one step at a time, accepting the steepness, the rocks, the roots across the path. Like water, he was adapting to what was, rather than resisting it, rather than wishing it were different. That evening, when rain came again and interrupted his garden work, Tenzin smiled. The rain was like a boulder in the river. He could not move. It could not change. It could not make it stop by wishing or resenting, but he could flow around it. He could work inside instead, mending his robes, organizing the tool shed, cleaning the temple. The work was different, but he was still moving forward, still accomplishing something useful, still practicing. And he realized this was freedom. Not the freedom to control circumstances, but the freedom to be at peace with circumstances. Not the power to make the river flow where he wanted, but the wisdom to flow with the river wherever it was going, trusting that it knew the way to the ocean, that it had been flowing toward the sea since before he was born, and would continue flowing long after he was gone. Like water, he was learning to be soft yet persistent, flexible yet purposeful, accepting yet always moving toward the ocean of enlightenment, not fighting the path, but flowing with it, not demanding that life be different, but meeting life as it was, with grace and adaptability and trust. This was the river's teaching, that true strength lies not in rigidity, but in flexibility, not in force, but in flow, not in controlling the current, but in surrendering to it with wisdom and trust. The river had been flowing for millions of years, wearing away mountains, shaping valleys, finding its way to the sea. It knew something about the path that Tenzin was only beginning to learn. As he lay down to sleep that night, he could still hear the distant sound of water flowing, a constant reminder of the teaching. Flow like water. Accept what is. Adapt to obstacles. Never lose sight of the ocean. Trust the current. Surrender to the way. This was the path. This was the practice. This was how to live, not fighting reality, but flowing with it, like water returning to the sea. The teaching of the river had settled into Tenzin's practice, like a stone finding its place in a stream bed. He found himself flowing more easily with the monastery's rhythm, accepting changes and disruptions, with less resistance, adapting to circumstances rather than fighting them. The garden was thriving under his patient care, and so was something in his own heart, a growing capacity to meet life as it came without demanding it be different. It was his 9th week at Tashigompa, and autumn was giving way to the early signs of winter. The air grew sharper each day, and the monks had begun preparing the monastery for the cold months ahead, stacking dried yak dung for fuel, repairing roof tiles, storing barley and dried vegetables. On this particular day, dark clouds gathered over the mountain peaks just after the midday meal. Tenzin was finishing his garden work, harvesting the last of the turnips before the hard frost came, when he felt the first drops, fat and cold, splashing on his bare arms, soaking into his maroon robes. Within minutes, the drops became a downpour. Rain drummed on the monastery roofs, with a sound like 1,000 drums turn the courtyard paths to streams and transform the garden into a muddy lake. The prayer flags hung heavy and dripping, their mantras weighted down by water. Tenzin hurried inside, shaking water from his robes, his hands muddy from the garden. He stood at the window of his small room, watching the storm intensify. The rain fell in sheets so thick he could barely see the trees at the edge of the compound. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer, echoing off the mountain peaks. Lightning flashed, illuminating the courtyard in brief, stark moments of white light. By evening, the rain had not stopped. It continued through the night, a constant roar on the roof tiles, punctuated by thunder that shook the ancient walls. Tenzin lay on his sleeping mat, listening to the storm, hoping it would pass by morning, imagining the damage to his garden, worrying about the plants he had tended so carefully. But morning came and the rain continued. The sky was a solid grey, heavy with water pressing down on the mountains like a weight. The courtyard had become a shallow lake. The paths were rivers of mud. All outdoor work was impossible. Even getting to the temple for morning prayers meant wading through ankle-deep water, the cold seeping through his boots, soaking his robes. Tenzin felt his chest tighten with frustration. His carefully structured routine was disrupted. He couldn't tend the garden, the plants would be drowning by now. The weeds would be growing unchecked in all that water. He couldn't walk his usual meditation path around the monastery grounds. He couldn't do any of the outdoor work that had become so central to his practice. Everything was wrong. Everything was ruined. He stood at his window watching the relentless rain and felt his mind begin to churn with complaints, with resistance, with the old familiar pattern of fighting against what is. This is too much. How long will it last? I need to work on the garden. The weeds will grow out of control. My practice is being interrupted. When will it stop? Why now, when everything was going so well? By afternoon of the second day, his frustration had ripened into something darker. A kind of trapped, restless agitation, like a wild animal in a cage. He paced his small room, unable to settle, unable to find peace. He tried to sit in meditation, but his mind was scattered, jumping from thought to thought like a monkey in a cage, unable to rest, unable to be still. The sound of the rain, which had seemed peaceful at first, now felt oppressive, overwhelming, inescapable, like being trapped inside a drum. He couldn't concentrate on anything. He tried to read a sutra, but the words blurred meaningless marks on a page. He tried to practice mindful breathing, but his breath felt tight and shallow, constricted by frustration. He tried to simply sit, but his body was restless. His legs twitching, his hands fidgeting, his mind racing. I just need it to stop, he thought, staring out at the grey curtain of rain. Just for an hour, just long enough to go outside, to move, to do something productive. This is unbearable. I can't practice like this. Everything is ruined. On the morning of the third day, Lama Dorje found Tenzin standing at his window, staring out at the rain with a frown etched deep into his face. His shoulders tight with tension, his jaw clenched. "You are fighting the rain," the Lama observed quietly, his voice cutting through Tenzin's spiral of resistance. Tenzin turned, startled. He hadn't heard the old monk approach. "I'm not fighting it, Lama. I'm just waiting for it to stop, so I can continue my practice, so I can get back to my work." Lama Dorje tilted his head slightly, a gesture Tenzin had come to recognize as gentle disagreement, as the Lama's way of saying, "Look more deeply. Your practice is not in the garden, Tenzin. Your practice is not on the walking path. Your practice is here now with the rain. Come." The Lama led him to the main temple. The great doors stood open to the storm, and the sound of rain filled the vast space. Rain on roof tiles, water rushing through gutters, wind howling through the eaves, the steady drumming on stone. It was almost deafening, overwhelming, a wall of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the temple. They sat facing the open doors. The rain so close, Tenzin could feel the mist on his face, could smell the wet earth, and stone could taste the moisture in the air. The altar's butter lamps flickered in the draught, their flames dancing wildly. "Listen," Lama Dorje instructed, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Do not try to block it out. Do not wish it were different. Simply listen. Let the rain be your meditation object." Tenzin tried. He closed his eyes and turned his attention to the sound. But immediately his mind began its familiar pattern of resistance. This is too loud. This is uncomfortable. How can I meditate with all this noise? When will it end? This is impossible. I can't do this. The Lama is asking too much. He opened his eyes and looked at the Lama, who sat perfectly still, his face peaceful as if the storm didn't exist, as if he were sitting in perfect silence rather than in the midst of chaos. I can't, Lama. Tenzin admitted, his voice tight with frustration and defeat. It's too much, too loud, too distracting. I can't find peace in this. Lama Dorje opened his eyes, and there was infinite compassion in his gaze. No judgment, no disappointment, only understanding. The Buddha taught that we suffer not from circumstances, but from our resistance to circumstances. The rain is just rain, Tenzin. It is neither good nor bad. It is simply what is happening. Your suffering comes not from the rain, but from your wish that it were sunshine. From your demand that reality be different than it is. Tenzin felt a flash of defensiveness rise in his chest. But it's natural to prefer sunshine. It's natural to want to be able to work, to move freely, to... Yes. The Lama interrupted gently, raising a hand. It is natural to have preferences, but there is a difference between preference and resistance. Preference says, I would enjoy sunshine. Resistance says, this rain should not be happening. This is wrong. This is unbearable. Reality is making a mistake. Do you see the difference? Tenzin was quiet, considering feeling the truth of the words. He did see the difference. He had moved far beyond simple preference. He had been at war with the weather, demanding that reality conform to his desires, insisting that the universe rearrange itself for his convenience. Try again, Lama Dorje said, his voice soft but firm. But this time, do not try to meditate despite the rain. Meditate with the rain. Let the sound be your meditation object. Let it fill your awareness completely. Stop fighting it. Stop wishing it were different. Just listen. Tenzin closed his eyes again. This time, instead of trying to push the sound away or wishing it were quieter, he opened to it completely. He let the drumming of rain become the center of his attention, the focus of his awareness, the object of his meditation. At first, it still felt overwhelming, chaotic, too much. But as he continued to listen, really listen, without judgment, without resistance, without the filter of his preferences, something began to shift. The sound had a rhythm to it, not a regular rhythm like a drum or a heartbeat, but a complex, layered rhythm like a symphony. Heavy drops on roof tiles, lighter drops on stone, the rush of water through gutters, the patter on the prayer flags, the splash in puddles. Each sound distinct yet part of a whole. He noticed that the sound created a kind of cocoon, a wall of white noise that actually helped his concentration rather than hindering it. With the rain so present, so constant, so all-encompassing, there was nothing else to pay attention to, nowhere else for his mind to wander. His mind, which had been scattered and restless, began to settle like silt sinking in water, like snow coming to rest. He sat with the rain for what might have been an hour, might have been more. Time seemed to dissolve, to become irrelevant. There was just this, the sound, the breath, the sitting, the being. The rain was no longer an obstacle. It was his practice. It was his teacher. It was his path. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt more peaceful than he had in days. The rain was still falling just as heavy as before, just as loud. But something in him had changed. He was no longer fighting it. He had stopped demanding that the moment be different. And in that acceptance, he had found peace. Lama Dorje was smiling, his eyes twinkling with approval and joy. You see, the rain did not change. You changed. You stopped demanding that the moment be different. And in that acceptance, you found peace. This is the practice meeting what is rather than fighting for what isn't. They sat together in silence, watching the rain fall, listening to its endless song. After a while, the Lama spoke again, his voice thoughtful, carrying the weight of deep wisdom. Do you know why this teaching is important? Why I brought you here to sit with the rain? Tenzin shook his head, still feeling the spaciousness in his mind, the peace that had emerged from acceptance. Because life is full of rain. Lama Dorje said, his voice gentle but serious. Not just weather rain, but metaphorical rain. Difficulties, obstacles, things we cannot control. Sickness comes, that is rain. Loss comes, that is rain. Aging comes, that is rain. Disappointment, failure, pain, all rain. If we only know how to practice in sunshine, if our peace depends on perfect conditions, then we will spend most of our life suffering, waiting for the rain to stop before we can be happy. He gestured to the storm outside, to the water pouring from the sky, to the grey world beyond the temple doors. But if we learn to practice with the rain, if we learn to find peace, not despite difficulties, but within them, then we are truly free. Then our peace does not depend on circumstances. It is not conditional. It is not fragile. It is like a mountain unmoved by storms, present in all weather. Tenzin understood. He'd been treating his practice like something that required perfect conditions, quiet comfort, routine control. But real practice was learning to be at peace in any conditions. Not just when things were easy, but when they were difficult. Not just in sunshine, but in storms. Not just when life cooperated with his plans, but when life had its own plans entirely. The rain continued for another day and night, but Tenzin no longer counted the hours, no longer stood at his window wishing for it to end. Instead, he used the sound as his meditation object. He sat with it, breathed with it, let it teach him about acceptance and presence, about meeting reality as it is, rather than as he wishes it to be. When he needed to move, he practiced walking meditation in the covered hallways, feeling each step, hearing the rain as accompaniment rather than interruption. When he ate, he tasted his food fully, the rain a constant background that somehow made the meal more vivid, more present, more alive. When he slept, the rain became a lullaby, its rhythm soothing rather than disturbing. On the fourth morning, he woke to silence. The rain had stopped. He went to his window and saw that the world had been washed clean. The sky was brilliant blue, so bright it almost hurt to look at. The mountains stood sharp and clear against that blue, their peaks white with fresh snow. The trees were intensely green, as if someone had painted them with new color. Water droplets caught the sunlight like diamonds on every leaf and blade of grass, on every prayer flag and roof tile. The beauty was almost overwhelming, so vivid it brought tears to his eyes. And Tenzin realized, without the rain, this clarity would not exist. The storm had cleansed the air, nourished the earth, revealed the world's colors with new intensity. What he had resisted as an obstacle had actually been a gift, a blessing, a necessary part of the cycle. He went outside and walked through the wet grass to the garden, his feet soaking in the cold water, his robes dragging through puddles. The plants were thriving, their leaves plump with water, their stems strong and green. The soil was rich and dark, perfect for growth. Even the weeds seemed more vibrant, more alive. The rain he had cursed had been exactly what the garden needed, what the earth needed, what life needed. Lama Dorje found him there, kneeling in the mud, examining a turnip plant that had grown noticeably. In the past few days, its leaves spread wide to catch the sun. The rain was not your enemy, the Lama said, standing beside him, his shadow falling across the wet earth. No. Tenzin agreed, looking up at his teacher with gratitude and understanding. It was my teacher. It taught me that peace is not found in perfect conditions. It's found in meeting whatever arises with an open, accepting heart. It taught me that I can find stillness in any storm if I stop fighting the storm and start flowing with it. The old monk nodded, his face radiant with approval. This is true freedom, not controlling the weather, but being at peace in any weather, not demanding that life give you only sunshine, but learning to dance in the rain, to find the teaching in every moment, the blessing in every condition. Tenzin stood, his robes muddy, his hands dirty, his heart light and free. He had learned something profound, that every moment offers an opportunity for practice, for awareness, for peace, if we stop demanding that the moment be different. The rain was not an interruption to his practice. It was his practice. The obstacle was the path. The difficulty was the teaching. And with that understanding, he was ready for whatever weather life might bring. Not because he could control it, but because he had learned to meet it with acceptance, with presence, with peace. The Buddha called this equanimity, the balanced mind that remains steady through pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, sunshine and storm. Not indifference, but a deep acceptance of life, as it is not as we wish it to be. Tenzin had found this equanimity, at least for a moment, in the meditation of rain, and he knew that this moment was enough. This practice was enough. This acceptance was the path itself, leading him home to the peace that had always been there, waiting beneath the storms, beneath the resistance, beneath the endless demand that life be different than it is. The sun climbed higher, warming the wet earth, and Tenzin returned to his work, grateful for the rain, grateful for the teaching, grateful for this path that was showing him how to be free, not by controlling life, but by accepting it, not by fighting storms, but by finding peace within them. The teaching of the rain had deepened Tenzin's practice in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had learned that peace was not conditional on circumstances, that acceptance was not passive resignation, but active wisdom. As autumn deepened into early winter at Tashi Gompa, the days grew shorter and colder, and the monastery settled into the quiet rhythm of the cold season. It was during his 10th week at the monastery that Tenzin became more aware of Venerable Kelsang, an elderly monk who lived in a small room at the back of the compound. Tenzin had noticed him during his first weeks, an ancient figure who moved slowly with the aid of a walking stick. His body bent with age, his maroon robes hanging loose on his thin frame. But what struck Tenzin most was not the old monk's frailty. It was his face, Venerable Kelsang smiled constantly. Not a forced smile, not a polite smile, but a radiant joy that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within, like light shining through an old paper lantern. His eyes sparkled with it. His whole being seemed illuminated by some inner fire that age and illness could not diminish. Lama Dorje had assigned Tenzin the task of bringing the old monk his meals, as Kelsang could no longer make the walk to the dining hall. Each morning and evening, Tenzin would carry a tray, tsampa butter tea, sometimes a bit of dried yak meat or vegetables to the small room, and each time he was greeted by that extraordinary smile. "Ah, young Tenzin," Kelsang would say, his voice thin but warm like wind through prayer flags. "How kind of you. Please sit with me a moment. Keep an old monk company." At first, Tenzin would make excuses. He had work to do, other duties to attend to. The garden needed tending. But gradually, he began to linger. There was something about the old monk's presence that was magnetic, peaceful, deeply comforting. The small room seemed to hold a quality of light that had nothing to do with the butter lamp flickering on the altar. One evening, as Tenzin set down the meal tray, he noticed that Kelsang had eaten almost nothing from the morning. The tsampa was untouched, the tea cold, and undrunk, the food barely nibbled. "Venerable, you must eat," Tenzin said with concern, kneeling beside the old monk's mat. "You're growing weaker. You need to keep up your strength." Kelsang smiled that radiant smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Yes, the body is leaving. It has served me well for 87 years, carried me on many pilgrimages, sat in many meditation retreats. But now it is ready to rest. This is natural, like leaves falling from a tree in autumn." Tenzin felt a chill run through him, despite the warmth from the small brazier in the corner. He had known, of course, that the old monk was dying. Everyone knew. But hearing Kelsang speak of it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather, was unsettling. "Aren't you afraid?" The question escaped before Tenzin could stop it. Then, embarrassed by his boldness, "Forgive me, Venerable. That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have." "Not at all," Kelsang said, gesturing for Tenzin to sit, his thin hand moving like a bird's wing. "It is a good question, an honest question. Sit, please. Let me tell you something." Tenzin sat on the floor beside the old monk's mat, pulling his robes around him against the cold. Up close, he could see how thin Kelsang had become, how the skin hung loose on his bones, how his breath came shallow and labored, yet still that smile, that inexplicable joy. "When I was young like you," Kelsang began, his voice taking on the quality of storytelling, "I was terrified of death. The very thought of it would wake me in the night, my heart pounding like a drum, my body covered in cold sweat. I would lie there in the darkness, thinking, one day I will not exist. One day, this consciousness, these memories, this person I call myself, all of it, will be gone, dissolved like salt in water." The fear was like a poison that infected every moment of my life. He paused to catch his breath, and Tenzin waited patiently, drawn into the story. "I could not enjoy anything." Kelsang continued, his eyes distant with memory. "I could not taste my food because I knew one day I would taste nothing. I could not love anyone because I knew I would lose them. I could not treasure any moment because I knew it was temporary, fleeting, already passing, even as it arrived. The fear of death made it impossible to truly live. I was like a man so afraid of drowning that he never learned to swim." "What changed?" Tenzin asked softly, leaning forward. "My teacher," Kelsang said, and his smile deepened, became even more radiant. "He was dying, much as I am now. I went to him in his final days, hoping for some secret wisdom about death, some special teaching that would take away my fear. And do you know what he asked me? Tenzin shook his head. He asked, "If you had only one day to live, how would you spend it?" Kelsang's eyes grew bright with the memory. I thought about it carefully, seriously, and I realized I would spend it exactly as I should spend every day. I would sit in meditation. I would walk mindfully. I would eat with gratitude. I would speak kindly to others. I would appreciate the sunrise, the taste of tea, the sound of birds, the feeling of breath moving in and out. I would be present, fully present with whatever arose. He reached for his cup of water with trembling hands, and Tenzin helped him drink, holding the cup steady. After a few sips, Kelsang continued. And then my teacher said something that changed everything. He said, "You do have only one day to live. This day. This is the only day you ever have. Yesterday is gone like a dream. Tomorrow is not promised, it may never come. There is only this day, this moment, this breath. If you live each day as if it were your last, you will never waste a single moment on anger or regret or petty concerns." Tenzin felt something shift in his understanding, like a door opening in a dark room, letting in light. The Buddha taught that understanding impermanence truly, understanding it not just intellectually, but in the marrow of your bones, does not make life sad. Kelsang said, his voice growing stronger with passion despite his physical weakness, "It makes life precious. Because I know this body will die, I treasure each breath. Because I know this day may be my last, I waste no moment on anger or regret or worry about the future. Death is not the enemy. Ignorance of death is the enemy because it lets us waste our lives on trivial things, lets us postpone joy, lets us take everything for granted." He gestured around his small room, the simple altar with its Buddha statue, the window showing the mountains beyond the butter lamp casting dancing shadows. "Look at this room. Simple, ordinary. But because I know I may never see it again, it becomes extraordinary. The way the light falls on the wall, the sound of wind outside, the warmth of this blanket. These are miracles, Tenzin. Everything becomes a miracle when you know it might be the last time." Tenzin watched as the old monk savored another small sip of water. His eyes closing in appreciation, his whole being focused on that simple act. It was just water, but the way Kelsang received it, it might as well have been nectar from the pure lands, the most precious substance in existence. "I am not sad to leave this life," Kelsang said, setting down the cup with Tenzin's help. "I am grateful to have lived it. Every moment of it, the joys and the sorrows, the successes and the failures, the health and the sickness, the easy times and the hard times. All of it was a gift. All of it was teaching. And now the gift is coming to its natural end, and that is also perfect. That is also exactly as it should be. But what comes next?" Tenzin asked the question that haunted him. "Aren't you afraid of the unknown, of what lies beyond death?" Kelsang's smile widened, became almost mischievous. "I am curious about it. The Buddha taught that death is not an ending. It is a transition, like a traveler moving from one inn to another, like changing clothes, like waking from one dream into another. This body, this personality, this particular expression of consciousness, these are temporary, like a rainbow appearing in mist. But consciousness itself continues, shaped by the karma we have created, moving toward its next expression according to causes and conditions." He shifted slightly on his mat, wincing with pain, but the smile never left his face. I have tried to live well. I have tried to practice the dharma, to cultivate compassion, to harm no one, to help where I could. I have spent years in retreat, purifying my mind, preparing for this moment. Whatever comes next will be the natural result of how I have lived. I trust that. I trust the law of karma as I trust the law of gravity. What I have planted, I will harvest. They sat in silence for a while, the room growing darker as the sun set behind the mountains. The evening light slanted through the small window, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Tenzin could hear the evening birds beginning their songs, the distant sound of monks chanting prayers. "May I ask you something, Venerable?" Tenzin said, finally voicing the question that had been growing in him since he first saw that inexplicable smile. "Of course, young one. How do you smile so much? Even now, even in pain, even facing death, you smile. How? Where does that joy come from?" Kelsang laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Because there is so much to smile about. Look." He gestured to the window with effort. "The light is beautiful. The birds are singing. You are here keeping an old monk company, showing kindness to someone who can give you nothing in return. My body hurts, yes, but my mind is at peace. I have lived long enough to see many springs, many autumns, many cycles of birth and death. I have known friendship and solitude, learning and teaching, struggle and ease. What is there not to smile about?" He reached out and placed his thin hand on Tenzin's arm, the touch light as a leaf. "The smile is not because everything is perfect. The smile is because I am no longer at war with imperfection. I am no longer demanding that life be different than it is. I am simply here present, with what is grateful for what has been curious about what will be. This is freedom, Tenzin. This is what the Buddha meant by liberation, not escape from life, but complete acceptance of it, complete presence, with it complete peace with its nature." Over the following days, Tenzin visited Kelsang more frequently. He would sit with the old monk, sometimes talking, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading sutras aloud, while Kelsang listened with closed eyes and that ever-present smile. He watched how Kelsang received each moment: the sunlight on his blanket, the taste of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the company of a visitor. Everything was received with complete attention, complete gratitude, complete presence. Kelsang grew weaker. Some days he could not speak at all, only smile and squeeze Tenzin's hand. Some days he seemed to be somewhere else, his eyes distant, his breathing shallow, his consciousness perhaps already beginning its journey to the next life. But the peace never left him. The smile never fully faded. Even in pain, even in confusion, there was that quality of acceptance, of surrender, of trust. One quiet morning, 12 days after their first real conversation, Tenzin brought the breakfast tray to find Kelsang lying very still. For a moment, he thought the old monk was sleeping, but then he saw the quality of the stillness, the absence of breath, the particular peace that only comes with death, the sense of a presence that has departed. Venerable Kelsang had died in the night alone in his small room, and on his face was that same gentle smile, as if death had been just another visitor welcomed with the same gracious acceptance as everything else, greeted like an old friend come to guide him home. Tenzin stood there for a long time, holding the breakfast tray, tears running down his cheeks. But they were not only tears of sadness, they were tears of gratitude for having known this teacher, for witnessing how a life could end with such grace and joy, for seeing that death need not be feared, that it could be met with a smile, with acceptance, with peace. At the funeral ceremony, Lama Dorje led the monks in prayers for Kelsang's favorable rebirth. They chanted the Bardo Thodol, the liberation through hearing in the between, guiding the consciousness through the intermediate state. Incense smoke rose thick and fragrant. Butter lamps flickered by the hundreds. The great horn sounded its deep note carrying across the mountains. Lama Dorje spoke of Kelsang's life, his years of practice, his kindness to all beings, his dedication to the Dharma, his many retreats in mountain caves. But what Tenzin remembered most was not the formal eulogy, it was the smile, that radiant, peaceful, joyful smile that said, "I have lived fully, I have loved completely, I have nothing to regret, and now I am ready for whatever comes next. Death is not the end. It is just another step on the journey." In the days after Kelsang's death, Tenzin found himself thinking differently about his own life, his own practice, his own inevitable death. He noticed how often he postponed joy, thinking, "I'll be happy when I achieve enlightenment," or "I'll appreciate life once I've mastered my practice," or "I'll really start living once I've solved all my problems." But Kelsang had shown him something different, something profound. Happiness was not waiting at the end of the path. It was available right now in this moment, in this breath, in this simple act of being alive. Not because everything was perfect, but because he could choose to be present with what was grateful for what he had, at peace with impermanence. That evening, as Tenzin sat in meditation, he felt something new, not a dramatic realization, but a gentle settling, a quiet acceptance. His body would age, his life would end, everyone he loved would eventually be lost. This was not tragic. This was simply the nature of existence, the law of impermanence that governed all conditioned things. And knowing this, truly knowing it, not just intellectually, but in his heart, made this moment infinitely precious. This breath, this heartbeat, this awareness of being alive, all of it was temporary, all of it was a gift. And that made it not less valuable, but more. That made it sacred. He thought of Kelsang's smile, and he found himself smiling too. Not because everything was perfect, but because he was learning to be at peace with imperfection. Not because he had conquered death, but because he was learning to accept it as part of life. Not because he had achieved enlightenment, but because he was learning that enlightenment might be nothing more than this complete presence, complete acceptance, complete peace with what is. Outside his window, the stars emerged one by one in the vast Himalayan sky. Prayer flags fluttered in the night wind, carrying their mantras to the heavens. And somewhere, Tenzin felt Venerable Kelsang was smiling, still his consciousness moving on to its next adventure. His teachings remaining behind like seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting to bloom in the hearts of those who had known him. Death was not the end. It was just another beginning. And life, precious and temporary, was not something to be feared or grasped, but something to be lived fully, loved completely, and released gracefully when the time came. Tenzin bowed toward the empty room where Kelsang had lived, a gesture of gratitude and respect. Then he returned to his practice, carrying the old monk's final teaching in his heart's smile. Be present, treasure each moment, accept impermanence, and when death comes, welcome it with the same grace you would welcome any other guest, knowing that it too is part of the journey, part of the teaching, part of the great mystery of existence. The teaching of Venerable Kelsang's peaceful death had settled into Tenzin's heart like a blessing, a reminder that the path was not about conquering death, but about living fully until death came. He continued his practice with renewed appreciation for each moment, each breath, each day of life and health. It was his 11th week at Tashi Gompa when a new monk arrived on a cold morning in early winter. His name was Jamyang, and he brought with him an air of severity that seemed to darken the very rooms he entered. He was perhaps 45 years old, his face set in permanent lines of disapproval, his movements sharp and precise, his eyes constantly scanning for faults. Tenzin first encountered him in the temple during morning prayers. After the chanting ended, Tenzin rose from his cushion and prostrated 3 times before the altar, as was customary. As he completed his prostrations, Jamyang's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Your prostrations are sloppy. Your forehead barely touched the ground. Is this how you show respect to the 3 jewels?" Tenzin stopped, surprised and embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "Intention means nothing without proper form." Jamyang interrupted, his voice cold. "Sloppy practice leads to sloppy mind. You should know this if you've been practicing for any length of time." Tenzin felt his face flush. He prostrated again, more carefully this time, making sure his forehead touched the ground fully. Behind him, he heard Jamyang sigh heavily, as if disappointed by the entire world and everyone in it. Over the following days, Jamyang found fault with everything. He criticized how Tenzin swept the courtyard. "Too much dust, you're just moving it around, not actually cleaning." He criticized how Tenzin chanted the morning prayers. "Your pronunciation of the Sanskrit is atrocious. Have you studied the texts at all?" He criticized how Tenzin held his bowl during meals. "The fingers should be positioned thus, not like you're holding a common dish. Were you never taught proper etiquette?" Nothing was good enough. Nothing met his exacting standards. And it wasn't just Tenzin. Jamyang criticized everyone. The cook's tsampa was too thick. The gardener's paths were uneven. The young novices were lazy and disrespectful. Even Lama Dorje's teachings were met with subtle corrections. Actually, the sutra says, or in the traditional interpretation, or my previous teacher explained it differently. Tenzin tried to ignore him. He tried to practice patience. But Jamyang's constant criticism was like sand in his shoe, small, persistent, increasingly irritating. By the end of the first week, Tenzin found himself avoiding the new monk, taking different paths through the monastery, timing his activities to minimize contact, feeling his stomach tighten whenever he heard Jamyang's voice. But avoidance only worked so well. They lived in the same small community, ate the same meals, attended the same teachings, and each encounter left Tenzin feeling smaller, more inadequate, more resentful. His mind began to fill with judgments about Jamyang, how arrogant he was, how unpleasant, how he made everyone miserable with his constant criticism. One evening, after Jamyang had spent 10 minutes explaining everything wrong with how Tenzin was washing dishes in the kitchen, the water was too cold. The scrubbing was insufficient. The drying was careless. Tenzin went to Lama Dorje. He found the old teacher in his room spinning a prayer wheel slowly, his lips moving in silent mantra. "Lama, I need guidance," Tenzin said, bowing deeply. "I'm struggling with anger, with resentment, with hatred even." "Sit," Lama Dorje said, setting aside his prayer wheel. "Tell me." The words poured out all the criticisms, all the judgments, all the ways Jamyang made everyone miserable. How can I practice peace when he is so critical, so unpleasant? Tenzin asked, his voice tight with frustration. He makes everyone around him feel terrible. Even you. He corrects your teachings, it's disrespectful. It's cruel. How can we practice compassion in the presence of someone so impossible? Lama Dorje listened calmly, his face showing neither agreement nor disagreement, neither approval nor disapproval. When Tenzin finally ran out of words, exhausted by his own venting, the Lama spoke. "Jamyang is your greatest teacher right now." Tenzin stared at him, certain he had misheard. "How can you say that he's terrible? He's making everyone miserable. He is suffering." Lama Dorje interrupted gently but firmly. "And he is showing you where your own peace is still conditional, still dependent on others' behavior. Your peace is still fragile, still easily disturbed by external circumstances. This is valuable information. This is a gift, though it doesn't feel like one. But Lama, he doesn't deserve kindness. He's cruel to everyone. He judges everyone. He makes people feel bad about themselves. Who decides what people deserve?" The Lama asked, his eyes penetrating. "And more importantly, who suffers when you carry hatred in your heart? Does your resentment hurt Jamyang? Or does it hurt you?" Tenzin was quiet. He knew the answer. His anger at Jamyang had been eating at him for days, disturbing his sleep, ruining his concentration, poisoning his peace. Jamyang seemed completely unaffected, continuing his criticism without any awareness of the resentment he was generating. Lama Dorje stood and retrieved a text from his shelf, an old worn copy of teachings on the four immeasurables. The Buddha taught a practice called metta loving kindness. In our tradition, we call it jampa. It is one of the most powerful practices in the Dharma, one of the most transformative. "I want you to begin it tonight." He explained the practice. Each morning and evening, Tenzin was to sit and send loving kindness to four categories of beings. First to himself. "May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering." Then to someone he loved, Lama Dorje, or his family, or a friend. Then to someone neutral, someone he neither liked nor disliked. And finally to someone difficult, Jamyang. "I can't," Tenzin protested immediately. "I can't wish him well. He doesn't deserve it. He makes everyone miserable. It would be dishonest, hypocritical." Lama Dorje's voice became firm, more serious than Tenzin had ever heard it. His eyes held a fierce compassion. "Listen carefully, because this is important. The Buddha taught that hatred never ceases by hatred, but only by love. This is an eternal law, as unchangeable as the fact that water flows downhill. You practice metta, not because Jamyang deserves it, but because you deserve to be free from the poison of hatred." He placed his hand on Tenzin's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. Hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Every moment you spend hating Jamyang, you hurt yourself. He may never change. He may continue to criticize and judge for the rest of his life. But you can change. You can free yourself from this suffering. That is what this practice offers, not to change him, but to free you. That evening, Tenzin sat on his cushion and began the practice with deep reluctance. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. This part was easy. He could feel the warmth of self-compassion spreading through his chest, a gentle kindness toward himself. May Lama Dorji be happy. May he be peaceful. May he be free from suffering. This too was natural. He loved his teacher. Wishing him well felt genuine, heartfelt. May the cook be happy. May he be peaceful. May he be free from suffering. The neutral person, this was straightforward enough. The cook was neither friend nor enemy, just someone who prepared meals. But then came Jamyang. May Jamyang be happy. May Jamyang be peaceful. May Jamyang be free from suffering. The words stuck in his throat like stones. His whole body resisted. I don't mean this, he thought. This is a lie. I don't wish him well. I wish he would leave. I wish he would stop criticizing everyone. I wish he would disappear. But he forced the words out anyway, as Lama Dorje had instructed, even though they felt false, even though his heart rebelled against them. May Jamyang be happy. May Jamyang be peaceful. May Jamyang be free from suffering. The next morning, Jamyang criticized how Tenzin was raking leaves in the courtyard. You're missing all the corners. Do you not see them? Are you blind? Tenzin felt the familiar surge of anger, the tightness in his chest, the heat in his face. But that evening, he sat again. May Jamyang be happy. May Jamyang be peaceful. May Jamyang be free from suffering. Day after day, he continued the practice. The words still felt false, still felt forced, but he kept saying them, kept sitting with them, kept offering this wish, even when every part of him wanted to offer something else, something harsh, something that would hurt as he felt hurt. Slowly, something began to shift. It started small, almost imperceptible. One day, Tenzin noticed that Jamyang ate alone. Every meal he sat by himself at the end of the table, and no one joined him. Everyone avoided him, just as Tenzin did. The new monk sat in isolation, surrounded by people but utterly alone. Another day, Tenzin saw Jamyang's face when he thought no one was watching. The harsh lines softened. The critical expression faded. What remained was something else. A deep sadness, a profound loneliness, a pain that seemed to go back years, perhaps decades. Tenzin began to observe more carefully, with curiosity rather than judgment. He noticed that Jamyang's hands shook slightly when he ate, a tremor that suggested illness or deep anxiety. He noticed the dark circles under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. He noticed how Jamyang's criticisms often came after someone had ignored him or walked away, as if the criticism were a desperate attempt to be noticed, to matter, to exist in others' awareness. One evening, as Tenzin sat in metta practice, a realization arose like the sun breaking through clouds. Jamyang criticized others because he criticized himself mercilessly. His impossible standards for everyone else were nothing compared to the impossible standards he held for himself. His harshness came not from malice, but from pain. He was suffering perhaps more than anyone else in the monastery, trapped in a prison of perfectionism and self-judgment, unable to accept himself or anyone else, unable to find peace. Tenzin's heart cracked open. Suddenly the words of the practice felt true. May Jamyang be happy. May Jamyang be peaceful. May Jamyang be free from suffering. He meant it now. He genuinely wished this suffering man could find peace, could be free from the harsh judge that lived in his own mind, could experience kindness from others. Yes, but more importantly, from himself. The next morning, when Jamyang began to criticize how Tenzin was sweeping the temple steps, "You're sweeping the dirt onto the clean area, you're making more work for yourself," Tenzin did something different. He stopped, looked directly at the older monk, and smiled. "Thank you for the guidance, brother," he said genuinely, without sarcasm or resentment. "I appreciate your attention to detail. Would you like to join me for tea after morning chores? I've been wanting to hear about your previous monastery." Jamyang stopped mid-sentence, his mouth open, his face showing complete confusion. He looked suspicious, as if searching for the trap, the mockery. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice uncertain. "Because I'd enjoy your company," Tenzin said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it. He was curious about this man, about what had made him so harsh, so critical, so unable to accept imperfection in himself or others. Jamyang's face went through several expressions: suspicion, confusion, something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed. I have work to do," he said finally, and walked away quickly, almost fleeing. But the next day, Tenzin tried again. "Good morning, Jamyang. The mountains are beautiful today, aren't they? The snow on the peaks is like white silk." Again, confusion. Again, a hasty retreat. But Tenzin persisted. Each day, a small kindness, a greeting, a smile, an invitation, an acknowledgement of Jamyang's presence, his existence, his worth as a human being. And each evening, the metta practice: "May Jamyang be happy, may Jamyang be peaceful, may Jamyang be free from suffering." The words no longer felt false. They felt true, necessary, urgent. He genuinely wished this suffering man could find peace, could lay down the burden of constant judgment, could experience a moment of self-acceptance. 2 weeks later, Tenzin was sitting in the garden after his work, enjoying the weak winter sun, when he heard footsteps. He looked up to find Jamyang standing nearby, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. "May I?" Jamyang began, then stopped. He tried again. "May I sit with you?" "Of course," Tenzin said warmly, gesturing to the ground beside him, moving over to make space. "Please." They sat in silence for a while. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Prayer flags snapped in the wind. A raven called from a nearby tree. Finally, Jamyang spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you kind to me?" Tenzin considered the question, carefully wanting to answer honestly. "Because the Buddha taught that all beings deserve loving kindness, including you, including me. We're all suffering. We're all trying to find peace, trying to be happy, trying to be free from pain. We're all doing the best we can with the understanding we have." Jamyang's eyes filled with tears. His face crumpled, decades of armor suddenly falling away. "Everyone else avoids me. I know I'm difficult. I know I'm..." He stopped, unable to continue, his voice breaking. "You're suffering," Tenzin said gently, with compassion rather than judgment. "And suffering makes us act in ways that create more suffering. It's a cycle, a trap, but it can be broken. The Buddha showed us how." "I don't know how to stop," Jamyang said, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "I see everything that's wrong with others, with myself, with the world. I can't turn it off. I can't stop judging, criticizing, finding fault. It's like a sickness in my mind, a demon I can't exorcise. I've tried for years. I've tried so hard, but I can't stop. I know, Tenzin said, his voice full of understanding. I have my own sicknesses, my own demons. We all do, but we can work with them. We can practice. We can be gentle with ourselves and with each other. That's what the Dharma teaches, not perfection, but compassion, not judgment, but understanding. Jamyang wept openly now, his body shaking with sobs, years of pain and loneliness pouring out. Tenzin sat with him, not trying to fix anything, not offering empty reassurances, not trying to make the pain go away. Just present, just compassionate, just there, a witness to suffering, a companion in the darkness. When Jamyang finally composed himself, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, he looked at Tenzin with something like wonder. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. No one has been kind to me in so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like. I'd forgotten that it was possible. Then let's practice together, Tenzin said, feeling the truth of Lama Dorje's teaching in his bones. Let's help each other. That's what this community is for, not to be perfect, but to support each other in our imperfection. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to isolate, but to connect. In the weeks that followed, Jamyang slowly changed. He still had critical tendencies. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. Habits formed over decades don't dissolve in days. But now, when he caught himself being harsh, he would stop, apologize, try again. He began to join others for meals, sitting at the communal table rather than in isolation. He began to smile occasionally, tentatively, as if his face were learning a new expression. The hard lines in his face began to soften like ice melting in spring sun. And Tenzin learned something profound. Metta, loving kindness, was not just a nice idea or a pleasant feeling. It was a power that could transform the world one heart at a time. It could take an enemy and make him a friend. It could take suffering and turn it toward healing. It could break cycles of hatred and create cycles of compassion. It could reach across the walls we build around our hearts and remind us that we are all the same, all suffering, all seeking happiness, all deserving of kindness. Lama Dorje, watching this transformation from a distance, smiled his knowing smile. He had seen it happen before and would see it again. This was the power of the Buddha's teaching, not just to change individuals, but to change relationships, to change communities, to change the very fabric of how humans connect with each other. One evening, as Tenzin and Jamyang sat together after evening prayers, the older monk spoke quietly. "You saved my life, you know. I was drowning in my own judgment, my own hatred, mostly hatred of myself. I was so lonely, so isolated. I think I was dying inside. And you threw me a rope. You showed me kindness when I deserved none. Why?" Tenzin thought about the answer, about the weeks of metta practice, about Lama Dorje's teaching, about the Buddha's eternal law. Because hatred never ceases by hatred. But by love, by patient, persistent, genuine, loving kindness, even the hardest heart can soften. Even the most difficult person can become a teacher. Even enemies can become friends. Jamyang nodded, tears in his eyes again, but this time, tears of gratitude rather than pain. "Thank you, brother. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing past my harshness to the suffering beneath. Thank you for reminding me that I am human, that I am worthy of kindness, that I can change." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Himalayan sky. Tenzin felt the truth of the practice in his heart. This was not weakness. This was the strongest force in the universe. This was metta. This was the practice of loving kindness transforming suffering into compassion, one heart at a time, beginning with our own. The Buddha had taught, hatred never ceases by hatred, but only by love. This is an eternal law. Tenzin had seen this law in action, had witnessed its power had become an instrument of its transformative force, and he knew that this teaching, this practice of sending loving kindness even to difficult people, especially to difficult people, would stay with him forever. A reminder that compassion is not just for those who are easy to love, but for everyone without exception, without condition, without limit. The transformation of Jamyang had been one of the most profound teachings Tenzin had received at Tashi Gompa. He had witnessed firsthand how loving kindness could melt the ice around a frozen heart, how compassion could reach across walls of judgment and criticism to touch the suffering beneath. The monastery felt different now, warmer, more connected, as if Jamyang's opening had somehow opened everyone else as well. It was Tenzin's 13th week at the monastery, and winter had fully arrived in the mountains. Snow fell regularly now, covering the peaks in thick white blankets, making the paths treacherous and beautiful. The monks spent more time indoors studying texts, practicing meditation, spinning prayer wheels by the warmth of braziers. On a particularly cold morning, the monastery bell rang in an unusual pattern. Not the regular call to prayers, but the signal for a visitor. Tenzin, who was helping in the kitchen, looked out to see a figure approaching up the mountain path. Even from a distance, the man's bearing suggested importance. His chuba was made of fine brocade. His boots were new and well made, and a servant followed behind carrying scrolls and books wrapped in silk. Master Dhammapala, no Lama. Dorje Tenzin corrected himself. Still sometimes mixing up the names from his old imaginings, was already in the courtyard, waiting. The visitor reached the gate breathing heavily from the altitude and the climb. Lama Dorje, the man called out, his voice carrying authority despite his breathlessness. I am Scholar Rinchen from the great monastery of Sera. I have traveled 7 days to meet you. Your reputation has reached even the great institutions of the lowlands. The Lama set down the prayer wheel he had been spinning and bowed. You are welcome here, friend. Please rest from your journey. The altitude is difficult for those not accustomed to it. I need no rest, Scholar Rinchen said, waving away the suggestion with an impatient gesture. I have come to discuss the Dharma with you. I have studied Buddhist philosophy for 25 years. I have read every major commentary on the sutras in Tibetan Sanskrit and Chinese. I have debated with masters across 3 provinces and won the Geshe degree with highest honors. Your reputation as a teacher has reached even the great debating halls, and I wish to test your understanding to engage in philosophical discourse with one who is said to have profound realization. Tenzin, watching from the kitchen doorway, felt a flash of defensiveness on behalf of his teacher. Test his understanding. The arrogance of this man. But Lama Dorje simply smiled his face, showing no offense, no pride, no reaction at all. I see. You must be thirsty from your climb. Please come, let us have tea. He led scholar Rinchen to a small room near the temple where guests were received. Tenzin followed at a respectful distance, curious to see how this would unfold, how his teacher would handle this pompous scholar. The Lama gestured for the scholar to sit on a cushion, then went to prepare tea himself, despite the visitor's protests that a servant could do it. As Lama Dorje prepared the butter tea with his usual mindful care, heating water, adding tea leaves and salt, churning it with butter until it was rich and frothy, Scholar Rinchen began to talk. And once he started, he barely paused for breath. "You see, Lama, I have developed a new interpretation of the Madhyamaka philosophy that reconciles the Prasangika and Svatantrika positions on the nature of emptiness. The key insight is that both schools are describing the same ultimate reality from different conventional perspectives. The Prasanika emphasis on the absence of inherent existence and the Svatantrika concept of conventional existence are not contradictory, but complementary. I have written 5 volumes on this subject, and they are being studied in the great monasteries." He continued explaining his theories, quoting sutras from memory in Sanskrit and Tibetan, referencing obscure commentaries by Indian and Tibetan masters, demonstrating his vast knowledge with the pride of a peacock displaying its feathers. Lama Dorje returned with the tea and placed a wooden bowl before the scholar, but Rinchen barely noticed, so engrossed was he in his own discourse. And furthermore, the concept of Buddha nature in the Tathagatagarbha literature must be understood not as a substantial self, but as the natural luminosity of mind. Many scholars miss this crucial point, confusing it with the Hindu concept of Atman. But I have traced the development of this idea through 12 centuries of commentary, from Nagarjuna through Chandrakirti to Tsongkhapa. Lama Dorje picked up the teapot and began to pour tea into Scholar Rinchen's bowl. The scholar continued talking, gesturing with his hands, his eyes bright with intellectual passion, completely absorbed in his own brilliance. Which brings me to the question of the two truths. Is conventional truth merely false, or does it have a kind of validity within its own sphere? The debate has raged for centuries, but I believe I have found the answer in a careful reading of the Bodhicharyavatara, where Shantideva clearly indicates that the Lama poured steadily, the bowl filled, the tea reached the rim, still the Lama poured, or unsaying. And this has profound implications for practice, because if we understand that emptiness does not negate conventional existence but rather reveals its true nature, then we can engage with the world without falling into either nihilism or eternalism, which are the two extreme views that the Buddha warned against in his very first teaching at. Tea spilled over the edge of the bowl, onto the tray, onto the low table. Still, Lama Dorje poured his face serene, as if nothing unusual was happening, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Scholar Rinchen stopped mid-sentence. "Lama, the bowl is full, it's overflowing. Stop pouring." Lama Dorje stopped and set down the teapot. He looked at the scholar with gentle, penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything: the pride, the insecurity. Beneath the pride, the desperate need to prove himself, the loneliness of someone who had mistaken knowledge for wisdom. "Like this bowl," he said quietly, his voice soft but clear. "You are full of your own opinions, your own knowledge, your own ideas, your own theories and interpretations and clever insights. How can I show you anything when there is no room in your bowl? How can I pour the tea of wisdom when your cup is already overflowing with the tea of concepts? Silence fell over the room like snow. Scholar Rinchen stared at the overflowing bowl, at the tea dripping onto the floor, at his own reflection in the spilled liquid. His face, which had been animated with intellectual excitement, slowly changed. The confidence drained away, replaced by something else. Recognition, embarrassment, and finally, humility. He began, then stopped. He looked down at his hands, at the scrolls his servant had carried all this way, at the books that contained his theories and interpretations. I have been a fool. Not a fool, Lama Dorje said gently, his voice full of compassion. A scholar, a learned man, a brilliant mind, but perhaps too full of learning to receive anything new. Perhaps so attached to what you know that you cannot see what you don't know. Scholar Rinchen was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more uncertain, stripped of its earlier confidence. I came here thinking I understood the Dharma because I had memorized the words, because I could recite sutras and quote commentaries and win debates. I thought knowledge was the same as wisdom. I thought if I could explain the teachings, I had mastered them. And now, the Lama asked, his tone gentle, inviting, now I see that I have been studying the menu instead of tasting the meal. I have been admiring the finger pointing at the moon instead of looking at the moon itself. He looked up at Lama Dorje with genuine humility, with the vulnerability of someone whose armor has fallen away. I know nothing. Will you teach me? Lama Dorje smiled warmly, his whole face lighting up with joy. Now you are ready to learn. Empty your bowl. Become a beginner again. This is the first step of wisdom, admitting that we don't know, that all our knowledge is just concepts, just words, just fingers pointing at something we have never actually touched. He poured fresh tea into a clean bowl and offered it to the scholar with both hands, a gesture of respect. The Buddha taught that attachment to views and opinions is one of the greatest obstacles to enlightenment. We cling to what we think we know, and this very clinging prevents us from seeing truth. Knowledge can become a prison if we are not careful, a wall between us and reality. Scholar Rinchen accepted the tea with both hands, bowing deeply over it. He sipped it slowly, mindfully, as if tasting tea for the first time, as if discovering what tea actually was beyond the concept of tea. It's good, he said simply, and there was wonder in his voice. Yes, the Lama agreed, smiling. Just tea, not a concept about tea, not a theory of tea, not a scholarly analysis of tea's properties and origins and chemical composition. Just the direct experience of drinking tea. This is where wisdom begins, in direct experience, not in concepts about experience. Tenzin, watching from the doorway, felt the teaching sink into his own heart. How often had he done the same thing? How often had he mistaken understanding concepts for understanding reality? How often had he thought that because he could explain something, he had actually experienced it? Over the following days, Scholar Rinchen stayed at the monastery, but he was a different man than the one who had arrived. He put away his scrolls and books. He joined the monks in their daily work, sweeping, cooking, carrying water, tending the few winter vegetables in the protected garden. He sat in meditation without analyzing his experience. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions like a child with genuine curiosity rather than to display his knowledge. One evening, Tenzin found Scholar Rinchen sitting alone in the garden, simply watching the sunset, the sky turning shades of orange and pink and purple over the white mountains. Tenzin sat beside him. "May I ask you something?" Tenzin said. "Of course. You knew so much. You had studied for 25 years. Why did the Lama's simple demonstration affect you so deeply? Surely you had heard teachings about beginner's mind before, about emptying the cup." Scholar Rinchen smiled a humble smile, very different from the confident expression he had worn upon arrival. "I had heard about it, yes. I could have given you a lecture on the concept of beginner's mind, quoted sources, explained its importance in Buddhist practice. But I'd never actually practiced it. I'd never actually emptied my cup. Knowledge is seductive, you see. It makes us feel secure, important, accomplished. The more I learned, the more attached I became to my learning. It became my identity, my worth, my defense against the uncertainty of existence." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands, examining it as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. "I had spent 25 years learning about enlightenment, but I had never actually practiced being present, being open, being empty enough to receive wisdom. I was so full of concepts that there was no room for truth. The Lama showed me this in a way that bypassed my intellect, that cut through all my clever theories and forced me to see the simple truth. I was like that overflowing bowl, unable to receive anything new because I was so full of what I already thought I knew." "But isn't learning important?" Tenzin asked, echoing a question he had asked himself many times. "Shouldn't we study the Buddha's teachings?" "Yes, of course." Scholar Rinchen said, his tone thoughtful. "But there is a difference between learning that opens us and learning that closes us. Learning that makes us humble and learning that makes us arrogant. Learning that leads us toward direct experience and learning that becomes a substitute for direct experience. Learning that empties the cup and learning that fills it so full nothing else can enter." He set down the stone carefully as if it were precious. "I had spent 25 years learning about enlightenment, but I had never actually practiced being present, being open, being empty enough to receive wisdom. I was so full of concepts that there was no room for truth. And the tragedy is I didn't even know it. I thought my knowledge was wisdom. I thought my ability to explain the Dharma meant I understood the Dharma. But understanding the Dharma and living the Dharma are two very different things." Lama Dorje appeared, walking slowly through the garden, his walking stick tapping on the stone path. He sat down with them, and the three sat in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, the Lama spoke his voice, carrying the weight of deep wisdom earned through decades of practice. "There is a saying, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The beginner approaches each moment with openness, with curiosity, with wonder. The expert approaches each moment with preconceptions, with fixed ideas, with the burden of what they think they already know." He looked at Scholar Rinchen with warmth and respect. "You were an expert. Now you are becoming a beginner. This is not a step backward. This is the path itself. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about emptiness, not just the emptiness of phenomena, but the emptiness of our own minds, the space that must be created for wisdom to enter." Scholar Rinchen bowed deeply, pressing his forehead to the ground in the traditional gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "Thank you, Lama. I understand now why you are renowned. Not because of your knowledge, though I'm sure it is vast, but because of your wisdom. Not because you can explain the Dharma, but because you embody it. You showed me in one moment what 25 years of study had failed to show me. The Dharma is not something to be explained." Lama Dorje said, his voice soft. "It is something to be lived. Words can point the way, but they cannot walk the path for us. Concepts can describe the destination, but they cannot take us there. At some point, we must put down the maps and actually make the journey. We must empty the cup so that it can be filled with direct experience, rather than concepts about experience." When scholar Rinchen finally left the monastery 2 weeks later, he left most of his scrolls and books behind, taking only a few essential texts. "I don't need them anymore," he told Tenzin as they said goodbye. "Or rather, I need them less than I need an empty cup. I can always return to study later, but first I need to learn how to see clearly, without the filter of all my opinions and theories and clever interpretations. First, I need to learn to be a beginner again." He bowed deeply to Lama Dorje, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for showing me that wisdom is not about filling the cup, but about emptying it. Not about accumulating knowledge, but about releasing attachment to knowledge. Not about becoming an expert, but about remaining a beginner, always open, always curious, always ready to see things as if for the first time." After he had gone, Tenzin helped Lama Dorje clean the guest room. As he wiped up the last traces of the spilled tea from that first meeting, he thought about his own cup. What was he full of? What attachments was he carrying that prevented him from receiving new understanding? What did he think he knew that was actually just concepts? Just ideas? Just fingers pointing at a moon he had never actually seen? "Ay, Lama," he said, voicing the question that had been growing in him. "I think I understand the teaching, but I'm not sure how to practice it. How do I empty my cup? How do I become a beginner again when I've already learned so much here?" Lama Dorje smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You are already practicing it by asking that question, by admitting you don't know, by being willing to be a beginner. This is the practice approaching each moment, each teaching, each experience with fresh eyes, with an empty cup. Not assuming you already understand, not filtering everything through what you think you know, not clinging to your insights and realizations as if they were possessions." He rinsed out the teacup they had used for the demonstration and held it up to the light streaming through the window. "See empty now, ready to receive. This is how we should be. Not empty of wisdom, but empty of the attachment to our own cleverness, our own knowledge, our own need to be the expert. Not ignorant, but humble. Not closed, but open. Always ready to receive, always willing to learn, always maintaining the mind of a beginner." Tenzin looked at the empty cup, seeing it not just as a vessel for tea, but as a teaching about the mind itself. To receive wisdom, we must first make space for it. To learn, we must first admit we don't know. To be filled with truth, we must first empty ourselves of our attachment to our own ideas, our own concepts, our own need to be right. This was the teaching of the empty cup, that true learning requires humility, that wisdom begins with not knowing that the fullest cup is the one that remains empty enough to receive. Not empty of understanding, but empty of the arrogance that thinks it has already understood. Not empty of knowledge, but empty of the attachment that turns knowledge into a barrier rather than a bridge. As Tenzin returned to his room that evening, he made a silent vow to approach each day as a beginner, to meet each teaching with an empty cup, to release his attachment to what he thought he knew, so that he could actually see what was real. This was the practice, not filling the cup with more and more concepts, but keeping it empty, keeping it open, keeping it ready to receive the tea of direct experience, the wisdom that comes not from books or theories, but from living fully, seeing clearly, being present with what is. The butter lamp flickered on his altar. Outside, prayer flags snapped in the wind, their mantras flying to the heavens. And Tenzin sat in meditation, practicing the art of the empty cup, not trying to achieve anything, not trying to understand anything, just sitting, just breathing, just being empty and open and ready to receive whatever wisdom the moment might offer. And so, we complete this journey together, you and I, having walked alongside Tenzin from his first restless steps at the monastery gate to his peaceful descent down the mountain, carrying home within him. Thank you for your presence here, for the gift of your time and attention, for allowing these ancient teachings to find a home in your heart. This story of Tenzin was never really about a monk in a monastery. It was about all of us, about the universal human journey, from seeking to finding, from restlessness to peace, from believing we are broken to recognizing we are whole. Through gardens and rivers, through silence and storms, through broken bowls and imperfect mandalas, we witnessed the same truth, revealing itself again and again, that peace is not something we must achieve or earn or become worthy of. It is our natural state, always present, always available, waiting beneath the ripples of our busy minds. We are not seeking something distant. We are remembering something intimate, something closer than our own breath, something we have always been but temporarily forgot. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. These simple words hold the essence of Tenzin's entire journey, and perhaps of our own. The monastery, the teacher, the practices, these were not the source of peace. They were mirrors reflecting back what Tenzin had always carried within himself. And so it is with us. The peace we seek is not in some future achievement, not in perfect circumstances, not in finally getting everything right. It is here now, in this moment, in the stillness beneath our thoughts, in the awareness that is always present, always clear, always home. As you move through your days ahead, perhaps you will remember Tenzin's lessons. When you find yourself throwing stones into the lake of your mind, creating unnecessary ripples, you might pause and simply let the water settle. When you judge yourself harshly for being imperfect, you might remember the mandala and smile at your beautiful human imperfection. When obstacles arise, you might flow like water around them, rather than exhausting yourself in resistance. The practice is not complicated. It is simply this: be present, be gentle with yourself. Remember that you are already whole. May you rest in deep peace tonight. May you wake with ease and clarity. May all beings everywhere find this same peace, this same recognition of their true nature. Thank you for being part of Buddhist Insights journey, this community of seekers and finders, of listeners and practitioners of hearts opening to the Dharma. If these stories brought you peace, or helped you remember your way home, consider subscribing so we can continue walking this path together. And if you know someone who might find rest here, someone whose heart is seeking what you have found tonight, share this with them. Peace multiplies when shared. Until we meet again, rest well. The path is always here waiting, and you are always home.